Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Jenny's words cut through my sleep like a knife. Please don't touch me. Her voice was small, desperate. My eyes snapped open in the darkness of our bedroom. I lay still, listening to my wife's breathing next to me. She was still asleep, but her face was twisted in distress. The bedroom was quiet except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan. Then I noticed the blankets at the foot of our bed. They lifted slightly, like someone was gently pulling them up. But there was nothing there. My heart started pounding against my ribs. The movement wasn't from the fan. It was too deliberate, too focused in one spot. I watched as a depression formed in the mattress at the foot of the bed, like someone was sitting there. The weight made the whole bed shift slightly. "No. Stay back," Jenny mumbled, turning her head on the pillow. Her eyes were still closed, but her fingers clutched at the sheets. I wanted to wake her, but my body wouldn't move. My throat felt tight, like I was being choked. The depression in the mattress deepened. Whatever was sitting there was getting heavier. A car drove past outside, its headlights sweeping across the room through the blinds. For just a second, I thought I saw a shadow where nothing should be, a darker patch of darkness at the foot of our bed. But when the light faded, there was nothing visible there, just the blankets, still pulled up in that unnatural way. My hands were shaking as I reached for the bedside lamp. I had to see what was happening. But before I could turn it on, Jenny's whole body went rigid beside me. "Get out," she said in her sleep. Her voice was different now, angry instead of afraid. "This isn't your place. You need to leave." The depression in the mattress vanished. The blankets settled back into place, but the temperature in the room dropped so fast I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. Jenny's eyes flew open and she sat up with a gasp. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking at my face. "You're white as a sheet." I told her what had happened, watching her expression change from confusion to fear as she remembered fragments of her dream. She said she'd been dreaming about her grandmother, not her real grandmother who died when Jenny was in college, but a twisted version that kept trying to climb into bed with us. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We sat up with all the lights on, drinking coffee and trying to convince ourselves it had just been a dream affecting us both somehow. But we knew it wasn't true. Something had been in our room. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet. Like something was holding its breath, waiting. Jenny started taking sleeping pills to avoid the dreams, but I could tell they weren't working completely. She would twitch and mutter in her sleep, her face drawn with tension. I installed a motion-activated camera at the foot of our bed. The first 2 nights, nothing showed up on the footage. But on the third night at exactly 3:47 a.m., the camera's infrared light turned on, detecting movement. The video showed the blankets moving on their own, rising and falling like someone was breathing under them. The temperature reading in the corner of the frame dropped from 72 degrees to 45 in less than a minute. I didn't show Jenny the footage. She was already having trouble sleeping, and I didn't want to make it worse. Instead, I started researching. I read everything I could find about sleep paralysis, shared dreams, and supernatural encounters. Most of it was useless, just stories from people trying to explain away their fears. But one account caught my attention. A woman in Oregon described almost exactly what we were experiencing. She said it started after her mother died, and the presence would sit on her bed every night at the same time. It never hurt her, but it seemed to be waiting for something. She finally got rid of it by having her house blessed by a local priest. I'm not religious, but I was desperate enough to try anything. I called several churches in our area, finally finding an elderly priest who listened to my story without judgment. Father Martinez came to our house the next day. He walked through each room slowly, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers in Latin. When he reached our bedroom, he stopped at the foot of the bed. His hands were trembling as he made the sign of the cross. "There was something here," he said quietly. "Something old. But it's not evil, just lost. Sometimes spirits get confused, especially if they had a strong connection to a place or person in life. That night, Jenny had another dream, but this time when she talked in her sleep, her voice was calm. "It's okay," she said. "I understand now. You can go home." The temperature dropped again, but not as severely as before. I felt a breeze pass through the room like someone walking quickly past me. Then Jenny sighed in her sleep and rolled over, peaceful for the first time in weeks. We never felt the presence again after that night. Jenny remembered more of her dream the next morning. She said her grandmother, her real grandmother this time, had come to explain. The spirit wasn't trying to harm us. It was another woman who had lived in our house decades ago. She had dementia near the end of her life and would often get confused, walking into the wrong bedroom thinking it was her own. Even after death, she kept coming back to what she thought was her room, not understanding why strangers were sleeping in her bed. Jenny's grandmother helped her remember who she was and guided her away. I still have the video footage from that last night. If you watch carefully, you can see two sets of footprints form briefly in the carpet before fading away. One shuffling and uncertain, the other steady and sure, leading the first toward the door. We kept the house, but we rearranged our bedroom. The bed is against a different wall now, and we painted the room a new color. Not to keep spirits away, we're not afraid anymore, but to make the space truly ours. Sometimes on quiet nights I think about that confused spirit and feel grateful for Jenny's grandmother helping her find peace. It would be easy to tell this story as a ghost story, to focus on the fear and uncertainty we felt. But in the end, it wasn't about fear at all. It was about compassion, about helping a lost soul find its way home. Jenny doesn't have nightmares anymore. She sleeps peacefully through the night, and the foot of our bed stays undisturbed. But every now and then, when I wake up at 3:47 a.m., I whisper a quiet thank you to both grandmothers, the one who helped and the one who needed helping. Then I roll over and go back to sleep, knowing our room belongs to us alone. We still live in that house. The motion sensor camera is still running, but it hasn't picked up anything unusual in months. The temperature stays steady through the night. The only movements in our bedroom are the normal ones. Cats walking across the floor, shadows from passing cars, the gentle rise and fall of blankets as we breathe. Life has returned to normal, or as normal as it can be after an experience like that. We don't talk about it much anymore, but we haven't forgotten. How could we? Some experiences change you forever, even if the change is subtle. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart racing from half-remembered dreams. But now, instead of fear, I feel a strange sense of peace. The foot of our bed is just the foot of our bed. No depressions in the mattress, no mysterious movements in the blankets. Jenny says she sometimes dreams of her grandmother, but they're good dreams now. They sit together in a sunny kitchen drinking tea and talking about nothing in particular. When she wakes up, she smiles and squeezes my hand. We've learned to live with the memory of those strange nights. We've made peace with the idea that there are things in this world we can't fully understand, but we're not looking for answers anymore. Sometimes it's enough just to know that, even in the darkest moments, there's always a way back to the light. The motion sensor camera is still running, its red light blinking steadily in the corner of our room. Sometimes I think about taking it down, but I leave it up. Not because I think we'll need it again, but because it reminds me that even in our most rational moments, we should stay open to the inexplicable. Our bedroom is different now. We've made it our own space, filled with our own memories. The old spirit's confusion is gone, replaced by the comfortable familiarity of our life together. And if sometimes, late at night, I think I hear footsteps in the hallway or feel a slight chill in the air, I don't panic anymore. Instead, I listen to Jenny's steady breathing beside me, watch the moonlight make patterns on our walls, and remember that every story, even the strangest ones, eventually finds its end. Our ghost story ended not with terror or tragedy, but with understanding and peace. The digital clock still glows in the darkness, marking the hours as they pass. But 3:47 a.m. is just another time now, no more significant than any other. And that perhaps is the greatest piece of all, knowing that even the most haunting moments can fade into memory, leaving us changed but not broken. Life goes on in our house. We wake up each morning, make coffee, go to work, come home, and sleep in our bed without fear. The only presence in our room now is our own, and that's exactly how it should be. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I think about writing down this story. But then I realize that some experiences don't need to be preserved in writing. They live on in the quiet moments, in the peaceful nights, in the understanding that sometimes the scariest things aren't scary at all. They're just lost, looking for their way home. And so our life continues, marked not by the strange events of those few weeks, but by the ordinary moments that make up our days. We've found our peace with what happened, and that peace is stronger than any fear we felt during those dark nights. The foot of our bed is just the foot of our bed now, and that's enough. The first time I heard the laughter, I was cleaning out the kitchen cabinets on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't funny laughter. It was wrong. The sound hit me like ice water down my spine, deep, guttural, and somehow wet. No one should have been in my garage. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Portland, Maine. My nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile down the road. I'd moved here 6 months ago after my divorce, wanting the isolation. The garage sits detached from the house, connected by a covered walkway. The previous owner had used it as a workshop. That afternoon, I was going through the motions of my usual cleaning routine. Martha, my ex-wife, used to say I was obsessive about keeping things organized. Maybe she was right. But the routine helped keep my mind off things. The empty house, the silence, the memories. I had just finished wiping down the inside of the upper cabinets when I heard it. A low chuckle at first, then building into that wet, gurgling laugh. It seemed to echo off the garage walls, carrying through the thin door that connected to the kitchen. My hands froze on the cabinet door. The laugh came again, longer this time. It sounded like someone choking while trying to laugh, a horrible liquid sound that made my stomach turn. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep next to the refrigerator. The weight of it felt good in my hands as I moved toward the garage door. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm armed and I've called the police." I hadn't called anyone, but they didn't need to know that. The laughter stopped. I waited, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Nothing but silence. My hand shook slightly as I reached for the doorknob. I turned it slowly, then yanked the door open, bat raised. The garage was empty. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating my workbench, tools hanging neatly on their hooks, boxes of holiday decorations stacked in the corner. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints in the dust on the concrete floor. No sign anyone had been there. I checked behind every box, under the workbench, in the small storage closet. Nothing. The side door was still locked from the inside, the windows sealed shut. "Must be hearing things," I muttered, lowering the bat. Working too hard. I went back inside, double-checking the locks, but I couldn't shake the sound from my mind, that horrible, wet laughter. The rest of the day passed normally. I finished cleaning the kitchen, made dinner, watched some TV. By bedtime, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. I went through my nighttime routine mechanically. Brush teeth, wash face, take medications, check all the doors and windows, set the alarm. The same things I'd done every night since moving in. Sleep came eventually, but it didn't last. The sound jerked me awake at 2:07 a.m. The same laugh, but closer now, much closer. It was coming from the hallway right outside my bedroom door. My body went rigid under the covers. Sweat broke out across my forehead despite the cool air from the ceiling fan. The laugh came again, wet and gurgling, like someone drowning in their own amusement. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My eyes fixed on the thin strip of darkness visible under the door. A shadow passed through that strip of darkness. Something was out there. The floorboards creaked. Another laugh, right at my door now. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, so slowly. I lunged for the bedside lamp, fingers fumbling with the switch. Light flooded the room. The doorknob stopped moving. The laughter cut off abruptly. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, pulled up the flashlight app, and climbed out of bed. The baseball bat was downstairs in the kitchen. Stupid. I should have brought it up. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, phone gripped tight in my sweating palm. The silence stretched out, broken only by my ragged breathing. Finally, I gathered my courage and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. The motion-activated nightlight cast a pale glow over the hardwood floor. Nothing moved in the shadows. I checked every room upstairs, then went down to the first floor. Everything was locked. The alarm system showed no signs of entry, but I knew what I'd heard. I spent the rest of the night in the living room with every light on, bat across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house settling. Morning came eventually. In the harsh light of day, I felt foolish. Stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind, that's all it was. I needed to get out more, maybe start dating again. I called in sick to work and spent the day installing more security cameras, adding motion sensors, replacing the old locks with heavy-duty deadbolts. The hardware store clerk gave me odd looks as he rang up my purchases, but I didn't care. That night, I double-checked every lock, tested every camera, and went to bed with the bat propped against my nightstand. I left the bedside lamp on. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every sound jolted me awake. The furnace kicking on, branches scratching against the windows, the ice maker dropping cubes. At 2:07 a.m., the laughter started again. This time it came from inside my closet. The sound was different now, still wet and gurgling, but with a new edge to it, almost hungry. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the closet door. It was closed, but I could see movement in the gap underneath, something shifting in the darkness beyond. The laughter grew louder, more insistent. The door began to vibrate slightly in its frame. I grabbed the bat and phone, backing toward my bedroom door. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped both. The closet door started to open. I ran, down the hallway, taking the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my panic. The laughter followed, echoing off the walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I made it to the kitchen, fumbling with my car keys. I had to get out, The laughter stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something wet hitting the floor behind me. Slow, heavy drops. Drip, drip, drip. I turned around. The kitchen was empty, but there on the floor, dark, glistening spots leading from the doorway to where I stood. I touched one with trembling fingers. It was warm and sticky. The laughter erupted again, right next to my ear, hot, wet breath on my neck. I ran out of the house in my pajamas, jumped in my car, and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The fluorescent lights and smell of coffee helped calm my racing heart. The elderly waitress didn't bat an eye at my appearance, just poured me a cup of coffee and left me alone in my booth. I spent the rest of the night there, planning my next move. I couldn't go back to the house, not alone. But who would believe me? When dawn broke, I called Mike, my oldest friend from college, who lived a few hours away. He was a contractor who'd helped me fix up the house when I first moved in. "I need your help," I said when he answered. "Something's wrong with the house." Mike arrived that afternoon. He listened to my story without interrupting, then helped me do a thorough inspection of the house. We checked every corner, crawl space, and vent. Found nothing. "Could be raccoons in the walls," he suggested. "They can make some weird noises." I didn't bother arguing. How could I explain the wet footprints, the breath on my neck? Mike agreed to stay a few days to help figure things out. We set up camping cots in the living room, safety in numbers. The first night passed quietly, so did the second. On the third night at 2:07 a.m., the laughter started again. It woke us both. Mike sat up on his cot, eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" The sound came from the kitchen, that horrible, wet, gurgling laugh. "You hear it too?" I whispered. Mike nodded slowly. That's not raccoons. We grabbed our phones and the bat, moving toward the kitchen. The laughter grew louder with each step. The kitchen was dark. The motion sensor light should have activated when we entered, but it remained dead. The laughter seemed to fill the room now, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Mike fumbled for the light switch. Nothing happened. "Power's out," he said, voice tight. Our phone lights carved weak circles in the darkness. The beams caught something moving near the ceiling, a darker shadow against the shadows. The laughter stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard something moving across the ceiling. Not footsteps, more like something dragging itself overhead, leaving wet trails behind. A drop of warm liquid hit my shoulder. "Run," Mike said. We bolted for the front door. Behind us, the laughter erupted again, closer now, pursuing us into the night. We didn't stop running until we reached Mike's truck. The engine roared to life and we peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind us. In the rearview mirror, I saw something standing in my doorway, a darker shape against the darkness. It raised one long, twisted arm in farewell. Then it laughed. We drove straight to Mike's house. His wife, Sarah, didn't ask questions when we showed up at 3 a.m., just made up the guest room and poured us both stiff drinks. The next day, Mike called in some favors. A priest came to bless the house. A paranormal investigator set up cameras and recording equipment. An old woman who claimed to sense spirits walked through every room, burning sage and muttering prayers. None of them found anything concrete. The cameras showed nothing but ordinary shadows. The recordings picked up no ghostly voices. The spirit-sensitive woman just shook her head and said the house felt heavy. But they all agreed on one thing. Whatever was in that house wasn't natural. I put the house up for sale the next day. Let someone else deal with it. I moved in with Mike and Sarah temporarily while looking for a new place closer to town. The realtor called a week later. No one was interested. The house had a reputation now. Stories about strange noises, wet footprints, mysterious laughter in the night. So here I am, stuck with a house I can't sell and can't live in. I drive by sometimes, always during daylight hours. It looks perfectly normal from the outside, just another aging New England home needing some paint and minor repairs. But sometimes when I drive past at night, I see lights moving inside even though the power's been shut off. And once, just once, I heard that familiar wet laugh floating on the night air. I keep driving now. I don't slow down anymore to look. But sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in that kitchen, watching dark drops fall from the ceiling, listening to that horrible laughter getting closer and closer. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I wake at exactly 2:07 a.m., straining my ears, half expecting to hear that sound again. So far, it hasn't found me, but I keep the baseball bat next to my bed just in case, and I never ever laugh at night anymore. The first time I felt it, I was scraping old wallpaper off the wall next to the attic stairs. A wave of heat pressed against my back, like standing too close to a space heater. I turned around. Nothing was there, just the empty hallway and the worn wooden steps leading up to the attic. I went back to work. The heat returned, stronger this time, along with a pressure between my shoulder blades, like someone standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I'm sitting at my kitchen table at 3 a.m., staring at a stack of old family photos I found in the attic, and my hands won't stop shaking. I inherited this house from my great-aunt Martha 6 months ago. I never knew her well. She was the family recluse, the odd sister who never married and rarely left the property. When her lawyer called to tell me I was her sole heir, I was shocked. I'd only visited the house twice as a kid, and the memories were vague. Creaky floors, musty rooms, and Martha shuffling around in her slippers, muttering to herself. The house needed work. A lot of work. The wiring was ancient, the plumbing leaked, and every surface was covered in decades of grime and peeling wallpaper. But property values in the area were rising, and I figured I could fix it up and sell it for a decent profit. I took a leave of absence from my IT job and moved in with just the essentials: my tools, a mattress, and my laptop. The first 2 weeks were normal. I stripped wallpaper, patched holes, and updated the electrical system. The work was tedious but straightforward. Then came that day by the attic stairs. After the second time I felt the heat and pressure, I convinced myself it was just a draft or my imagination. Old houses make weird air currents, right? But it kept happening. Every time I worked near those stairs, the same sensation would creep up on me. The heat would start gradually, then build until sweat ran down my back. The pressure would increase until I could barely stand it, like someone pressing their full weight against me. I started avoiding that section of the hallway. I'd take the long way around to reach the other rooms. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from those stairs. Last night I finally forced myself to climb up to the attic. I needed to check the insulation anyway, and I was sick of letting this weird fear control me. I grabbed my flashlight and toolbox and started up the steps. The heat hit me halfway up. My shirt stuck to my back instantly. The pressure came next, so strong I had to grab the railing to keep from stumbling backward. My flashlight beam bounced off dusty boxes and old furniture. The air was thick with decades of accumulated dust. I pushed through the sensation and made it to the top. The attic was huge, running the full length of the house. Boxes and trunks were stacked everywhere, along with sheet-covered furniture and piles of yellowing newspapers. I spotted a box labeled photos and grabbed it, thinking maybe I'd find some old pictures of the house to guide my renovation. The box was full of albums and loose photographs spanning at least 50 years. I brought them downstairs to the kitchen where the light was better. Most were typical family photos, picnics, holidays, birthdays. But then I found one that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of the attic stairs, taken from the hallway below. The image was faded and slightly blurry, probably from the 1970s based on the wood paneling visible on the walls. But what caught my eye was the dark figure standing halfway up the steps. At first I thought it was just a shadow or a problem with the photo. But the more I looked, the more distinct it became. It was definitely human-shaped, but completely black, like a silhouette cut from dark paper. The figure appeared to be facing down toward the camera. My hands started shaking. I dug through the rest of the photos. There were more, many more. Different years, different times of day, different angles, but in every photo of those stairs, that dark figure was there. Always in the same spot, always facing down. I found a photo dated 1962 that showed a family gathering. The stairs were visible in the background, and there was the figure. 1975, Martha's birthday party. The figure stood on the stairs behind the celebrating group. 1989, a Christmas morning photo. The figure lurked in the shadows of the stairwell while children opened presents in the foreground. Some of the photos had notes on the back. Most were just dates and names, but one caught my eye. It was another shot of the stairs, this one from 1983. Martha's handwriting on the back read, "It never leaves that spot. I've learned to live with it." I spent the next few hours spreading photos across the kitchen table, arranging them chronologically. The figure first appeared in photos from 1960, right after Martha moved into the house. It was in every single photo of the stairs taken after that date, always the same position, always watching. My rational mind tried to find explanations, a trick of light and shadow, a fault in the camera, Martha playing some kind of decades-long prank. But I knew what I'd felt on those stairs, the heat, the pressure, the sensation of being watched. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery. 2 weeks ago, I'd taken some before pictures to document the renovation. I scrolled to the ones I'd taken of the hallway and stairs. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. There it was, the same dark figure, in my photos, in my digital 21st century photos. The sound of creaking wood made me jump. It came from upstairs, from the direction of the attic stairs. I sat absolutely still, barely breathing. Another creak, like someone shifting their weight on old boards. The kitchen suddenly felt too exposed. I grabbed the photos and my phone and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I pushed a chair under the handle for good measure. That was 4 hours ago. I haven't heard any more noises, but I can't sleep. I keep staring at the photos spread across my bed, trying to make sense of them, trying to understand what's been watching me from those stairs. The oldest photos show the house when it was first built in the 1920s. No figure on the stairs, nothing unusual at all. But something changed in 1960. What happened that year? What brought that thing here? I pull up my laptop and start searching through property records and old newspaper archives. In 1960, Martha bought the house from the original owners, the Henderson family. They'd lived here for 40 years without any reports of strange occurrences. So what changed when Martha moved in? I dig deeper into Martha's history. She was a nurse at the local hospital from 1955 to 1985. Never married, lived alone, kept to herself. Nothing unusual stands out until I find an article from 1960. It describes a fire at the hospital where Martha worked. 3 people died, including a patient named James Sullivan who was trapped in his room on the 3rd floor. My heart starts pounding as I read more. Sullivan had been a long-term patient, paralyzed from a car accident. He was under Martha's care. According to the article, she tried to reach him during the fire, but was pushed back by the heat and smoke. She watched from the stairs as his room burned. The stairs. She watched from the stairs. I think about the figure on my attic steps. The way it always faces down, watching. The heat I feel whenever I get close. The crushing pressure, like someone desperately trying to move, to push through an invisible barrier. The sun is coming up now. In a few hours, I need to call a contractor about the electrical work in the upstairs hallway. Part of me wants to sell the house immediately, to run from whatever entity has attached itself to those stairs. But I keep thinking about Martha's note. I've learned to live with it. She stayed in this house for over 50 years, sharing it with whatever stands on those stairs. Did she feel guilty about not saving Sullivan? Did she understand that his presence wasn't meant to be threatening, but watching, waiting, remembering? I look at the most recent photo I took, the one on my phone. The figure is there, as clear as ever. But in the morning light, it doesn't seem as menacing. It looks patient, like it's been standing guard all these years, keeping vigil on those steps. I get up and walk to my bedroom door. I can hear the house settling, the normal creaks and groans of old wood. But now there's something else, a feeling I hadn't noticed before. Not fear, exactly. More like awareness, acknowledgement. I unlock the door and step into the hallway. The attic stairs are visible at the end of the corridor. I take a deep breath and walk toward them. The heat starts immediately, but I don't fight it this time. The pressure builds between my shoulder blades and I let it come. I stop at the bottom of the stairs and look up. I can't see anything unusual, but I know it's there. Watching. Waiting. Maybe that's all it's ever done. Good morning, I say quietly, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to an empty staircase. I'm going to be working on the wiring today. I hope that's okay. The pressure on my back eases slightly. The heat fades to a gentle warmth like sunlight through a window. I take that as a yes. I've been in this house for 6 months now. The renovation is almost complete, but I'm not sure I want to sell anymore. There's something about this place, about the presence that shares it with me. Martha understood that. Maybe that's why she left it to me. I head to the kitchen to make coffee, already planning my work for the day. The stairs creak behind me, but I don't turn around. Some things I'm learning are better left unobserved. Some presences are meant to be felt, not seen. The figure will be there when I pass the stairs again, standing its eternal watch. The heat will come, and the pressure, and I'll know I'm not alone in this house. It's not exactly comfort, but it's something close to it. A shared vigil. A quiet understanding. I pour my coffee and look out the kitchen window at the rising sun. In a few hours, the contractor will arrive, and I'll have to explain why we need to work around the attic stairs, why that section of the hallway needs to stay exactly as it is. I'm not sure what I'll say. How do you explain sharing your house with a shadow? But that's a problem for later. For now, I sit with my coffee and listen to the old house wake up around me. Somewhere above, On the attic stairs, my unusual housemate keeps its watch. The morning light streams through the windows, and I feel the familiar warmth on my back, constant as a heartbeat, steady as time itself. My hands are still shaking as I type this. I need to get it down while it's fresh in my mind, while I can still remember every detail. It happened 3 hours ago on Route 23, that long stretch of road that cuts through Morrison County. I've driven it hundreds of times, but never like this. Never seen anything like this. I was heading home from a late shift at the factory. It was 2:47 a.m. I remember checking my phone at a stop sign, wondering if Sarah would still be awake when I got home. The radio was playing some old country song, turned down low. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow lines that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. The road was empty. It always is at that hour. Just me, my old Ford pickup, and miles of cornfields on either side. The harvest was weeks ago, leaving only dry stalks that rustled in the wind. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting everything in that weird silver light that makes familiar things look strange. I first noticed something was off when my truck's temperature gauge started dropping. It had been a cool night, maybe 45 degrees, but suddenly the digital readout showed 38, then 35, then 32. My breath started fogging in front of my face. The heater was still running full blast, but it felt like someone had opened all the windows. That's when I saw it in my peripheral vision, something moving alongside the road, keeping pace with my truck. I was doing about 50 mph, but whatever it was, it matched my speed exactly. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, or maybe a deer running parallel to the road. But deer don't run that fast, and they definitely don't run like that. I slowed down to get a better look. The figure slowed too, staying perfectly aligned with my passenger side window. It was running on 2 legs, but the movement was all wrong. The stride was too long, too fluid, like watching someone move underwater, except at highway speeds. My headlights caught it full on when I turned slightly to the right. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, but thin, impossibly thin. Its skin looked gray in the headlights, but not like human skin. More like wet clay or rubber. No clothes, no hair, just that smooth, uniform surface. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where knees should be, and they didn't swing as it ran. They just trailed behind it like ribbons in the wind. The head was the worst part. It was elongated, stretched back like it was being pulled by some invisible force. Where a face should have been, there was just smooth, featureless gray. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just that blank, stretched surface, turned toward me as it ran. I hit the gas hard. The engine roared and my truck lurched forward. 60 mph, 70, 75. The figure kept pace, its legs moving in that impossible fluid motion. At 80 mph, it started to fall behind, but only slightly. That's when it did something I'll never forget. It turned its head, that smooth, featureless head, a full 180 degrees to face me while still running forward, and then it changed direction. In one instant, without slowing down or turning its body, it veered sharply right and disappeared into the woods that lined that stretch of road. I slammed on the brakes. I don't know why. Maybe some primitive part of my brain needed to know what I'd just seen was real. The truck screeched to a halt, leaving long black marks on the asphalt. I sat there, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The temperature gauge started climbing back up. 33, 35, 38. My breath stopped fogging. The night seemed normal again, except for one thing. Where the figure had turned into the woods, there were marks on the road. Not footprints exactly, but depressions in the asphalt. Like someone had taken a hot iron and pressed it into the surface, leaving perfect oval shapes in a line leading into the trees. I got out of the truck. I had to see them up close. The marks were about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. They were deep, maybe 2 inches into the solid asphalt, and the edges were smooth like they'd been molded. I touched one. It was cold, colder than the air around it. My fingertips went numb almost instantly. The trail of marks led straight into the woods. The trees were thick there, old oaks and maples with heavy branches that blocked out the moonlight. I could see maybe 20 feet in, where the marks continued in that straight line, ignoring trees and undergrowth, just pressing through everything in their path. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. They came out clear. The marks were definitely there, perfectly visible in the flash. I took video too, walking along the line of impressions. That's when I heard it. A sound from deep in the woods, like someone dragging something heavy through fallen leaves. But fast. Too fast for anything natural. I ran back to my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice before getting them in the ignition. As I pulled away, I kept checking my mirrors, but the road behind me was empty. Just those marks in the asphalt getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared in the darkness. I drove straight to the police station in Morrison. Officer Jenkins was on duty. I've known him for years. Our kids go to the same school. I showed him the pictures and videos. He listened to my story without interrupting, then made some calls. By sunrise, there were state police and some other officials at the site. They took samples of the marks, measurements, photographs, asked me the same questions over and over. That was 6 hours ago. They're still out there from what I hear. Some kind of scientists showed up from the state university. They're analyzing the marks, running tests. Officer Jenkins called an hour ago to tell me they found something strange in the woods. A trail of those same marks running for miles, straight as an arrow, ignoring all obstacles. Trees, rocks, even a small stream. Nothing deflected the path. I'm sitting at my kitchen table now, trying to make sense of it all. Sarah's asleep upstairs. I told her I got held up at work. I haven't decided if I'm going to tell her what really happened. How do you tell someone you saw something that shouldn't exist? The local news is already picking up the story. They're calling it a mysterious vandalism case, or suggesting it might be some kind of elaborate prank. But I know what I saw. That figure running alongside my truck wasn't human. The way it moved, the impossible speed, that blank face. It was something else entirely. I've called in sick to work. I can't face that drive home again, not yet. Not while I keep seeing that smooth gray head turning to face me in my mind. Not while I remember the way it just changed direction, defying physics and everything I thought I knew about how things move in this world. The police want me to come in later today to make a formal statement. They're bringing in some experts from out of state, they say. People who deal with unusual phenomena. I don't know what to tell them. How do you describe something that shouldn't be possible? I keep checking my phone, looking at the pictures and videos I took. They're still there, still clear as day. The marks in the asphalt, the straight line disappearing into the woods. Proof that it wasn't just my imagination, that something really did run alongside my truck last night at impossible speeds. But there's something else bothering me, something I noticed when I was reviewing the videos earlier. In one of them, when I was filming the marks leading into the woods, there's a frame, just one frame, where something moves in the background. It's blurry and dark, but I can make out that same elongated head, turned at an impossible angle, facing directly at the camera from between two trees. I've tried to convince myself it's just a shadow or a trick of the light. But I know what I saw, and I know it saw me too. Whatever that thing was, it was aware. It knew I was watching it. And for some reason, it wanted me to see it turn into those woods. The temperature in my kitchen just dropped 10 degrees. The coffee in my mug is starting to frost over. Outside through my window, I can see the wind has picked up, making the trees sway. But the leaves are moving in the wrong direction, like they're being pulled towards something. I'm going to stop writing now. I need to check all the doors and windows, make sure everything's locked. The sun is up, but somehow that doesn't make me feel any safer. Not when I know what's out there, running faster than any human could, leaving those impossible marks in its wake. If you're driving on Route 23 late at night, keep your eyes on the road. Don't look to the side if you see movement in your peripheral vision. And whatever you do, don't stop if you see something running alongside your car. Just keep driving as fast as you can until you're somewhere with lights and people and normal things that move the way they're supposed to. because now I know. We're not alone out here in the dark. There are things that share our world. Things that can run alongside our cars on empty rural roads. Things that leave marks in solid asphalt like it's soft clay. Things that watch us with faces that aren't faces, moving in ways that shouldn't be possible. I don't know what it was that I saw on Route 23. I don't know if I'll ever know. But I do know one thing. I'm never driving that road at night again. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some mysteries should stay mysteries. The temperature's dropping again. I need to go check the locks one more time. And maybe, just maybe, I'll catch a glimpse of something tall and gray moving through my backyard, its head turned at an impossible angle, watching me with a face that isn't a face. But this time I won't stop to take pictures. This time I'll do what I should have done on that dark road. Keep moving, keep going, and try to forget what I saw. Because some things in this world aren't meant to be seen, aren't meant to be understood. Some things should stay in the shadows, running alongside empty roads in the dead of night, leaving their impossible marks in their wake. The first thump hit at 3:17 a.m. A heavy footstep on old wood, followed by another and another. Someone was walking down the basement stairs in my brother Dave's house. Except Dave was away on business in Seattle, and I was alone in the house. I sat up in the guest bed, my t-shirt sticking to my back. The steps continued their slow descent. Thump, thump, thump. My phone showed 7 missed calls from my ex-wife and a 12% battery. I'd forgotten to plug it in again. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. A pause. Then they started again from the top. I'd arrived at Dave's place 3 days ago after Karen kicked me out. 3rd time this year. She'd found the empty whiskey bottles I'd hidden in the garage behind the Christmas decorations. Just until I get back on my feet, I'd told Dave over the phone. He'd sighed but said yes. He always did. The footsteps kept their rhythm. Down. Pause. Start again from the top. Down. Pause. Start again. My hands shook as I pulled on my jeans. The guest room was on the 2nd floor, directly above the kitchen. The basement door was in the kitchen. I knew the layout well. I'd helped Dave renovate the place 5 years ago, before the drinking got bad, before Karen started finding bottles. Thump. 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 I grabbed my phone's flashlight and the baseball bat from beside the bed. Dave had left it there, just in case, when he showed me the room. The steps creaked under my feet as I moved toward the hallway. Each sound felt too loud, like they were competing with the footsteps below. The kitchen was dark. Moonlight cut through the windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. The basement door stood closed, its outline barely visible in the darkness. The footsteps continued their pattern behind it. My throat was dry. I needed a drink. The thought came automatically, followed by the usual wave of shame. Focus. The footsteps were the problem now. Focus on the footsteps. I pressed my ear against the door. The sounds were clearer now. Heavy boots on wooden stairs, moving with mechanical precision. Down. Pause. Start again from the top. The wood didn't creak like it should under that weight. The steps sounded wrong. My phone buzzed. Karen's name lit up the screen. Not now. I declined the call, and my battery dropped to 11%. The door handle was cold against my palm. I tightened my grip on the bat, thumb finding the worn spot where the tape had peeled away. The footsteps continued their rhythm, oblivious or uncaring about my presence. I pulled the door open. The hinges whined. I should have oiled them when Dave asked last year. The basement gaped below, a mouth of absolute darkness that swallowed my phone's weak light. The footsteps stopped. The silence pressed against my ears. I could hear my own breathing, too fast and shallow. Sweat rolled down my back. The air from the basement carried the smell of old wood and concrete dust. Then the footsteps started again, from the top, but I could see the stairs now, illuminated by my phone. They were empty. My light traced the steps. 14 of them, I remembered that from the renovation. Each one bare wood, unfinished because Dave kept talking about carpeting them someday. Nothing moved on them, but the footsteps descended. Thump, thump, thump. The sound reached the bottom, paused, and began again from the top. My light showed nothing. The stairs were empty, but someone was walking down them, over and over and over. I stepped onto the first stair. The wood creaked under my weight, a different sound from the phantom footsteps. Those were heavier, more final. My phone battery dropped to 10%. Another step down. The footsteps continued their pattern, passing through the space where I stood. No temperature change, no brush of movement, just the sound of boots on wood. 3 steps down. 4. The basement darkness pressed closer. My phone light caught the edges of Dave's workbench at the bottom of the stairs, his tools hanging in neat rows on the wall, everything exactly where it should be. Halfway down now. The footsteps kept their pace, walking through me as they descended. My hands were slick with sweat on the bat and phone. 9 steps down. 10. The battery warning flashed. 9%. The footsteps reached the bottom again, paused, and started their descent once more. I reached the basement floor. Concrete cold through my socks. I'd forgotten shoes. My light swept the space. Dave's workshop took up half the basement, tables lined with projects in various stages of completion. The other half was storage, boxes of holiday decorations, old furniture, Karen's craft supplies from when she used to visit. The footsteps continued above me now. Down. Pause. Reset. Down. Pause. Reset. My phone light caught something on Dave's workbench. A paper, held down by a hammer. Dave's handwriting, rushed but readable. John, had to leave for Seattle early. Business emergency. Make yourself at home, but don't go in the basement. Really important. I mean it. We'll explain when I get back. Dave. The footsteps kept their rhythm. My phone dimmed to save power. 8% battery. I should have gone back upstairs. Should have called Dave. Should have left the house. Should have done anything except what I did next. But I'd spent 3 years making bad decisions. Why stop now? I moved deeper into the basement. The footsteps continued their pattern on the stairs behind me. A metronomic rhythm of boots on wood. My light caught more of Dave's workshop. The tools hung perfectly aligned on their hooks. Level, measured. Dave had always been the methodical one. Something was different about the tools. I stepped closer. Each tool was secured to its outline on the wall, but the outlines were wrong. They didn't match the tools. A hammer hung where a saw was outlined. A wrench occupied the space marked for a drill. I reached for the hammer. As my fingers touched the handle, the footsteps stopped. The silence hit like a physical thing. My breath sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. The hammer felt wrong in my hand, too light, like it was hollow. Behind me, a new sound started. Not footsteps this time. The scrape of metal on metal, coming from deep in the storage area. My phone flashed another warning. 7%. The light dimmed further. The scraping grew louder. Something caught my light at the edge of the storage area. A reflection where there shouldn't be one. Metal where Dave stored cardboard boxes. I moved closer. The boxes were wrong. They looked like cardboard from a distance, but up close I could see the truth. Metal painted to look like cardboard. Perfect replicas of moving boxes, holiday decoration containers, and storage bins. The scraping sound came from behind them. Regular, rhythmic, like the footsteps had been. My phone light showed gaps between the metal boxes, spaces just wide enough to see through. 6% battery. I leaned forward, pressing my eye to one of the gaps. My light revealed more metal beyond, walls of it spanning the space where the storage room should be. The scraping grew louder. Something moved in the darkness beyond the metal walls. Something big. My phone died. The darkness was complete. The scraping stopped. Then behind me the footsteps began again. From the top of the stairs. Down. Pause. Reset. I dropped the bat. It hit the concrete with a clang that echoed off the metal walls. Not concrete. More metal, painted to look like concrete. The storage boxes scraped against each other as something pushed them aside. Heavy steps approached, not from the stairs this time, but from the darkness beyond the false storage area. I ran. My feet found the stairs in the darkness, muscle memory from helping install them. The phantom footsteps continued their pattern, passing through me as I climbed. My shoulder hit the wall, real wood this time. I could feel the difference. 13 steps up, 14. I slammed the basement door behind me and turned the lock. For a moment, nothing but my own gasping breath and the pounding of my heart. Then the footsteps started again. Down. Pause. Reset. And beneath them a new sound. Metal scraping against metal, growing louder. I didn't pack. Didn't change. Didn't even put on shoes. I grabbed my keys and ran. The sun was rising when I pulled into the gas station 50 miles away. My hands shook as I plugged in my phone and dialed Dave's number. He answered on the first ring. "John, are you okay?" "Dave," I said, "what the hell is in your basement?" A long pause. The footsteps echoed in my memory. Down. Pause. Reset. "I can't tell you," he said finally. "But you need to tell me exactly what you saw, and you need to tell me if it saw you." Behind his voice I heard something. A familiar sound, muffled by distance and phone static. Footsteps. Walking downstairs. I hung up and started driving again. I haven't stopped since. The bottles stay in the trunk now, untouched. I need to stay sharp, stay focused. Because sometimes, when I let my guard down, I hear them. Footsteps. Walking downstairs. Over and over and over, and underneath them, growing louder, the sound of metal scraping against metal. Karen keeps calling. Dave too. But I can't answer. Can't risk stopping. Can't risk sleeping too long in one place. Because the sound follows me now. Down. Pause. Reset. Always the same pattern. Always getting closer. My car's been running fine, handling the endless driving well. Though lately the engine's been making an odd sound. Not the usual mechanical noises. It sounds like footsteps, walking downstairs. The splintered door hung off its hinges when I pushed it. The creak echoed through the empty field behind my old family home. 25 years since I'd last set foot in this barn, but the musty smell hit me exactly the same. Hay, rust, and something else I couldn't place. Something darker. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through gaps in the wooden slats. Dust particles floated in the air. The barn looked smaller than I remembered, but no less imposing. My real estate agent had insisted I check every structure on the property before listing it, and this was the last one. Just a quick walkthrough, I told myself. Then I could get back to Chicago and forget about this place again. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I stepped inside. Broken farm equipment lay scattered around. An old tractor with missing wheels, rusted tools I couldn't name, empty feed bags rotting in corners. Standard abandoned barn stuff. But something made the hair on my neck stand up. A feeling of being watched, maybe, or remembered. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and swept the beam across the walls. That's when I saw the first name. Carved deep into a wooden post, about chest height. Michael P. Below it, Sarah K. More names sprawled across the beam, some so old they'd almost worn away. My hand trembled slightly as I moved the light higher, following the trail of carved letters. Then I froze. There it was, unmistakable. David Reynolds, my name, in my own 12-year-old handwriting. But I had no memory of carving it. None at all. A flutter of movement caught my eye. Something had fallen from the hayloft above, drifting down in the shaft of light from a hole in the roof. I walked over and picked it up. A photograph, old and creased. The image showed a man standing in front of this very barn, but his face had been scratched out with what looked like knife marks. Deep, angry scratches. My throat went dry. I remembered my Aunt Clara's warnings when I was a kid, how she'd grab my arm if I wandered too close to the barn. "That place is cursed," she'd whisper. "Has been since before you were born." We all thought she was just being dramatic, but now I heard a soft thump from above. My pulse quickened. Probably just a bird, I thought. But I swept the flashlight beam up toward the hayloft anyway. More photographs were scattered across the wooden floor up there. Dozens of them. The ladder to the loft looked barely stable, half the rungs missing or rotted through. But I had to know. I tested my weight on the first solid-looking rung. It held. Slowly, I began to climb. The loft smelled worse than below, mold and decay in that same unidentifiable darkness. My flashlight revealed more names carved everywhere, covering every surface. And photographs. So many photographs, spread out like some twisted art installation. All of different people, all with their faces violently scratched out. I picked up another photo. This one was newer than the first, maybe from the 80s based on the clothes. A family posing by a car, their faces obliterated. Another showed what looked like a high school graduation. Another a wedding, all defaced the same way. My foot hit something solid. A metal box, old but not rusted, padlocked shut. I grabbed it and nearly dropped it when I heard another sound from below, like footsteps but dragging. Scraping. I swung the flashlight toward the ladder. Nothing there. But the sound came again, closer. My heart hammered against my ribs. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. I shoved the box under my arm and scrambled down the ladder, not caring about the creaking wood. My foot went through one rotten rung, but I yanked it free and kept going. The dragging sound followed, but I refused to look back. I burst out of the barn into the late afternoon sun, gasping. The door slammed behind me with a bang that echoed across the empty fields. I stood there for several minutes just breathing, the metal box heavy under my arm. Back in my rental car, I examined the box more closely. The padlock was old but good quality. I'd need tools to open it. I glanced at the barn in my rearview mirror as I drove away. Just weathered wood and broken windows. But something shifted in one of those windows. A shadow, moving when it shouldn't have. I called my Aunt Clara that night from my hotel room. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. "You went in the barn," she said. Not a question. "How did you—" "I told you to sell that place without looking back. Some things need to stay buried, David. I found my name carved in there, Aunt Clara, and photographs, and this box. What the hell happened in that barn?" She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "It started before you were born. People would go missing, not from our town, but travelers, drifters. No bodies ever found, but sometimes their cars would turn up on the old road behind the farm." My mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "Your grandfather, he wasn't well, David. After the war, something in him broke. He'd have these episodes where he wouldn't remember things. Days would just disappear. Your grandmother tried to protect him, protect all of us. She locked up the barn, but he always found a way back in." I thought of all those scratched out faces. My hands started shaking. "The police never proved anything," Clara continued. "But people knew. They stopped coming around. Your father moved us all away when you were 13, told everyone it was for work. But really, the box," I said. "Did you know about a metal box?" Another long silence. "Don't open it, David, please. Some doors shouldn't be opened." I hung up and stared at the box sitting on the hotel desk. The padlock gleamed in the lamplight. I could drive back to Chicago tomorrow, throw the box in Lake Michigan, pretend I never found it. List the property as is and let some developer tear it all down. But I knew I wouldn't. I needed to know. Maybe not tonight, but soon. That was 3 days ago. I'm still in the hotel, staring at the box. I bought bolt cutters this morning. They're sitting next to it, waiting. Every time I reach for them, I hear my aunt's voice. Some doors shouldn't be opened. But I keep thinking about my name carved in that beam. When did I write it? Why don't I remember? What else don't I remember? The padlock feels cold under my fingers, like it's been storing up decades of secrets, waiting for someone to finally set them free. Maybe that someone is me. Maybe it has to be me. I pick up the bolt cutters. Their weight is reassuring, solid, real. Whatever's in this box, I tell myself, it's just paper. Just old photographs or letters or documents. Nothing that can hurt me now. The padlock breaks with a sharp snap. Inside, I find a stack of notebooks, my grandfather's journals dated from 1946 to 1981. The handwriting starts neat but grows increasingly erratic. Newspaper clippings about missing persons. More photographs, these ones unmarked. And at the bottom, a single envelope addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. The letter inside is short. Dear David, if you're reading this, you found your way back to the barn. I'm sorry. I tried to protect you from the truth, but maybe that was wrong. Your grandfather wasn't evil. The war changed him, broke something inside that couldn't be fixed. The barn, it amplified whatever was broken. Made him see things that weren't there. Made him do things he'd never do otherwise. You were so young when it started affecting you too. The nightmares, the sleepwalking, finding you in the barn, carving names you couldn't remember carving. That's when your father and I knew we had to get you away. The barn feeds on darkness, David. Not evil, just the regular darkness we all carry inside us. The regrets, the anger, the fear. It takes those feelings and twists them, makes them grow until they're not yours anymore. I should have burned it down years ago, but I couldn't, because some small part of me still hoped your grandfather would come back to us, that whatever the barn took from him could be returned. I was wrong. Burn it all, David. The barn, the photographs, these journals. Burn it and don't look back. Don't let it take from you what it took from him. With love, Grandma Marie. I set the letter down with shaking hands. Through my hotel window, I can see the distant shape of the barn silhouetted against the setting sun. Even from here, it seems to watch me, to wait. My phone rings, making me jump. It's Aunt Clara again. Did you open it? She asks without preamble. Yes. She sighs heavily. Then you know what needs to be done. I look at the journals spread across the hotel bed. So many secrets, so many answers. But my grandmother was right. Some answers aren't worth the cost. I'll take care of it tonight, I tell Clara. Be careful, she says. That place, it doesn't like to let go easily. I hang up and start gathering the journals and photographs. The sun has almost set, painting the sky blood red. In a few hours, it will be dark enough. I have the gasoline in my car, bought it this morning along with the bolt cutters. 5 gallons should be enough. More than enough. The barn can keep its darkness. Tonight, I'm giving it back to the light. But first, I need to make one last trip inside. One last climb up to that hayloft. I need to find my name among all those carvings and do what I should have done 25 years ago. Cut it out. Remove all trace that I was ever there. That any of us were ever there. Some chains need to be broken. Some curses need to end. And sometimes the only way forward is to burn the past to ashes and start again. I check my pocket for the matchbox. It's there, waiting. In a few hours, that barn will be nothing but memories and smoke. But for now, I sit in my hotel room, watching the sun sink behind it, watching shadows gather in its broken windows, wondering if, somewhere in those twisted beams and rotting boards, my grandfather's darkness still lingers, still waits. Night is falling. It's almost time. I stand and gather my supplies, flashlight, knife, gasoline, matches. The barn has taken enough from my family. Tonight I take something back. Peace, closure, a clean slate. The sun slips below the horizon. Darkness falls. I grab my car keys. It's time to end this. 3 people died in this apartment in 1954. I know this now. I wish I didn't. I found the listing online, a steal for a 1-bedroom in downtown Boston. The building dated back to the 1920s, all brick and ornate moldings. The real estate agent mentioned its historic charm at least 5 times during the showing. What she didn't mention was why the rent was so low, or why the previous tenant had left all their furniture behind. I moved in on a Tuesday. The first night was fine. The second night, too. On the third night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from the walls, maybe the pipes or the ventilation system in this old building. But as I lay there in bed, the whispers got clearer. They weren't forming words exactly, but they had a rhythm to them, like multiple people having a conversation just below the threshold of comprehension. I got up and walked through the apartment. The whispers stopped. The living room felt like a freezer compared to my bedroom. My breath came out in visible puffs. I checked the thermostat, 72 degrees, but my hands were shaking from the cold. The next morning, I ran into my neighbor in the hallway, Mrs. Chen from 4B. She was taking out her trash, moving slowly with her cane. "How are you liking the apartment?" she asked. "It's good, though the heating seems a bit uneven." She gave me a long look. "How long have you been here?" 3 days. She nodded slowly. "That's about right. They usually don't make it past a week." "What do you mean?" "The cold spots, the whispers. You've noticed them, haven't you?" My stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I've lived here 30 years, seen a lot of people come and go from that unit. They all leave within 7 days. Something about that apartment isn't right." I wanted to laugh it off, but my mouth was dry. "What happened there?" "Murder-suicide, 1954. A man killed his wife and daughter, then himself. The police found them all in the bathtub. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building made me jump. Around 2 a.m. the temperature dropped again. The cold spot had moved to my bedroom this time. The whispers started closer than before. I turned on all the lights and sat in the living room with the TV on. Around 4 a.m., the screen started flickering. The whispers got louder. A dark shape moved in my peripheral vision. When the sun came up, I called the real estate agent. She didn't sound surprised when I said I wanted to break my lease. Just sighed and said she'd email me the paperwork. I started packing that afternoon. As I was taking down clothes from the closet, a child's laugh echoed through the apartment, high and clear. Then a woman's scream, cut short. I ran out with just my backpack and laptop, left everything else behind. Mrs. Chen was in the hallway again. 4 days, she said. Longer than most. I slept at a hotel that night. When I went back the next day with some friends to get my stuff, the apartment was empty. Not just of my things. All the furniture from the previous tenant was gone too. The rooms were completely bare, like no one had ever lived there. The real estate agent denied there had ever been furniture in the apartment. Said I must be confused. But I have photos on my phone from move-in day showing the old couch, the dining table, the bed. I tried researching the 1954 murders. Found nothing in newspaper archives. Asked Mrs. Chen about it again, but her daughter said she'd moved to Florida months ago. The current tenant in 4B had never heard of her. Sometimes I drive by the building late at night. The windows of my old apartment are always dark, but sometimes when I look up at just the right moment, I see shapes moving behind the glass, and even from the street, I swear I can hear whispers. The for rent sign has been up for 6 months now. The price keeps dropping. I wonder how many people have tried to live there since me. How many have lasted the full week? I have a new apartment now, in a different part of the city. Modern building, concrete and steel. No history, no charm, no cold spots. I keep the heat on even in summer, and I never look at apartment listings in historic buildings anymore. But sometimes late at night, I still hear those whispers. Not from the walls or the pipes, from my own memory. And I know that somewhere in that old brick building downtown, in that apartment with the ornate moldings and the low rent, someone else is hearing them too. For the first time. For what will probably be their last week there. because no one ever makes it past 7 days. The ghosts make sure of that. The first scream came at 11:42 p.m. I checked my watch because I wanted to note exactly when everything went wrong. I was stacking boxes of auto parts in aisle E47 of the Morgan & Sons warehouse when I heard it. A muffled cry that sounded like someone had their mouth covered. I froze with a timing belt box in my hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the tall metal shelves that stretched up toward the ceiling. On the night shift, I was used to being alone with just the hum of the ventilation system and the beeping of the occasional forklift backing up. But this sound was different. Human. Wrong. My first thought was that Jimmy from receiving had hurt himself again. Last month he'd dropped a transmission on his foot and screamed so loud security came running. But Jimmy's shift ended at 10, and besides, this sound was too desperate. I set the box down slowly, trying not to make any noise. The concrete floor felt hard through my steel-toed boots as I stood completely still, listening. For 10 seconds, nothing but the usual warehouse sounds. Then movement caught my eye. A shadow sliding between the shelves 3 aisles over, visible through gaps in the stacked inventory. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the metal shelving. No response. I should have called security right then. Should have pulled out my phone and dialed the front desk where Mark sat watching his Netflix shows. But something held me back. Maybe the fear of looking stupid if it turned out to be nothing, or maybe just plain old curiosity. Instead, I started walking toward where I'd seen the movement. The wheels of my pallet jack squeaked as I pushed it aside. Each step echoed slightly in the cavernous space. I passed aisle E48, then E49, moving as quietly as I could while scanning between the shelves. The white labels on the boxes seemed to glow in the fluorescent light. Brake pads, fuel pumps, alternators, everything in its assigned place except for whatever was moving in the shadows. Another scream pierced the silence, closer this time and clearly female. It was followed by the sound of boxes falling and a man's voice saying, "Shut up." The words were harsh, angry. My heart started pounding against my ribs. I pulled my phone out, finger hovering over the keypad, but before I could dial, I heard running footsteps coming toward me. I ducked behind a pallet of oil filters just as 2 figures sprinted past the end of my aisle. The first was a woman in a torn blouse, her dark hair wild around her face. Blood ran from her nose and her eyes were wide with terror. Close behind her was a man in dark clothes, reaching for her with gloved hands. They disappeared around the corner toward the loading docks. My hands shook as I tried to dial security. I fumbled and dropped the phone. It clattered on the concrete floor, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet warehouse. I heard the running footsteps stop. "What was that?" The man's voice growled. "Check it out." New footsteps approached, slower, deliberate. I pressed myself against the boxes, hardly daring to breathe. A shadow fell across the floor at the end of my aisle. I could either stay hidden and hope they didn't find me or run. Neither option seemed good. The footsteps came closer. I saw the toe of a black boot edge into view, my muscles tensed, ready to sprint. Then a crash echoed from the direction of the loading docks, followed by another scream. The boot disappeared as its owner ran toward the sound. I snatched up my phone and finally managed to dial security. It rang 4 times before Mark answered. "Front desk," he said, sounding bored. "Mark, there's someone in the warehouse, 2 people, a woman. I think she's hurt. Call the police." "Whoa, slow down, what?" Another crash interrupted him, followed by the sound of shattering glass. It came from the shipping office. "Just call the police." I hung up and started running toward the noise. Looking back, I can't explain why I ran toward danger instead of away from it. Maybe I couldn't stand the thought of something happening to that woman while I hid. Maybe I was just stupid. The shipping office was a small room with windows looking out over the loading dock. As I approached, I saw that one of the windows was broken. Glass crunched under my boots. The woman was backed into a corner, holding a pair of scissors in front of her like a knife. The man in dark clothes stood between her and the door. "Just come quietly, and this'll be easier." he said, his voice eerily calm now. "You're only making it worse. Stay back." The woman's voice shook, but her hands were steady on the scissors. I looked around frantically for a weapon. There was a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall near me. I grabbed it just as the man lunged for the woman. She slashed with the scissors, catching his arm. He cursed and stumbled back. I burst through the door and swung the fire extinguisher at his head. He must have heard me coming. He spun and caught the extinguisher, yanking it from my hands. His face was covered by a black ski mask. Cold blue eyes locked onto mine. "Bad choice," he said. His fist slammed into my stomach. The air rushed out of my lungs and I doubled over. He brought his knee up into my face. Pain exploded through my nose. I tasted blood. The woman screamed and charged forward with the scissors. The man turned to face her, giving me a chance to tackle him from behind. We crashed into a desk, sending papers and a computer monitor flying. I tried to get my arm around his throat, but he was stronger than me. His elbow smashed into my ribs once, twice, 3 times. My grip loosened. He twisted free and threw me off. I hit the ground hard. Through blurry vision, I saw him pull something from his jacket. A gun. "Enough!" he shouted, pointing it at me, then the woman. "Both of you on the ground. Now!" I lay there gasping, blood running down my face. The woman slowly lowered herself to her knees, still gripping the scissors. "Drop them," the man ordered. She let the scissors clatter to the floor. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her eyes burned with hatred. "You should have just given me what I wanted," the man said. "Now." Red and blue lights suddenly strobed through the broken window. A police siren wailed in the parking lot. "Freeze! Police!" A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. The man's head snapped toward the window. In that moment of distraction, the woman dove for the scissors. He turned back and fired. The gun was deafening in the small office, but she'd already rolled behind a filing cabinet. The bullet punched through metal. I launched myself at his legs. We went down together, wrestling for the gun. His mask was askew, revealing part of a pale, stubbled jaw. He slammed the butt of the gun into my temple. Stars burst across my vision. Then the woman was there, driving the scissors into his shoulder. He screamed and the gun went off again, the bullet hitting the ceiling. I managed to knock the weapon from his hand. It skittered across the floor. The man threw me off and stumbled to his feet. Blood spread across his jacket from the scissors still embedded in his shoulder. He yanked them out with a grunt of pain and ran for the loading dock. "Stop! Police!" Officers were streaming in through the rear entrance, guns drawn. The man vaulted over a stack of pallets and disappeared into the maze of shelves. Gunshots echoed through the warehouse. I lay on the office floor, everything spinning around me. The woman knelt beside me. "Are you okay?" Her hands fluttered over my injuries. "I think so," I managed. "You?" She nodded, then burst into tears. I sat up slowly and put an arm around her shoulders as police officers rushed past us in pursuit of the man. They caught him trying to climb the security fence behind the building. Later, I learned the full story. The woman, Sarah Chen, was an accountant who had discovered evidence of money laundering at her firm. The man was hired muscle scent to silence her. She'd fled when he tried to grab her outside her home, eventually taking refuge in what she thought was an empty warehouse. I spent the night in the hospital getting stitches and x-rays. Broken nose, 2 cracked ribs, mild concussion. Could have been worse. Sarah visited me the next day with coffee and donuts. She had a black eye and her arm was in a sling, but she was alive. "Thank you," she said, "for helping a complete stranger." I shrugged, then winced at the pain in my ribs. Couldn't just hide while something bad happened. She squeezed my hand. Most people would have. Maybe she was right. But sitting there in that hospital room, battered but alive, I knew I'd do it again. Not because I'm brave or heroic. I'm not. I was terrified the whole time. But sometimes you have to act despite the fear. Sometimes hiding isn't an option. I still work the night shift at the warehouse. The shipping office window is fixed and the bloodstains are cleaned up. Everything looks normal. But sometimes when I'm alone among the towering shelves, I remember the sound of those screams, the flash of scissors, the weight of the fire extinguisher in my hands. I remember the choice I made. The official incident report lists it as an attempted kidnapping interrupted by warehouse employee Michael Torres. Just another crime statistic. But I know the truth of what happened that night, how close it came to ending differently, how thin the line is between life and death, between acting and hiding. Sarah and I still meet for coffee sometimes. We don't talk much about that night. We don't need to. We both carry the memories, the scars, the knowledge of what humans are capable of, both the evil and the good. And late at night when I hear unexpected sounds in the warehouse, I don't hesitate anymore. I call security immediately, but I keep the fire extinguisher close just in case. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Something was moving outside my window at 3:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone when the noise woke me up. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd heard before, not a deer, not a raccoon, not even a bear. The noise came again, a wet, clicking sound followed by something heavy dragging across the ground. I sat up in bed, my heart already beating faster. The rental cabin creaked around me. I'd picked this place specifically because it was isolated, 2 miles down a dirt road from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. Perfect for a weekend of writing and clearing my head after the divorce. Now that isolation felt like a mistake. The sound came closer to my window. Click, click, drag. Click, click, drag. My mouth went dry. I could hear breathing now. Deep, raspy breaths that seemed to rattle in a chest much larger than any local wildlife should have. I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand, knocking over an empty water glass in the process. The glass hit the wooden floor with a loud thunk. The breathing and clicking outside stopped immediately. "Shit," I whispered. The silence stretched out, heavy and expectant. My own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. After 30 seconds of complete quiet, I heard it moving again, but now it was heading around to the front of the cabin. The wooden porch boards groaned under its weight. Based on the sound, whatever was out there had to be at least as heavy as a full-grown man. I stood up slowly, trying to avoid making the floorboards creak. The flashlight felt slick in my sweaty palm. I was wearing just boxers and a t-shirt, and the cool air raised goosebumps on my legs. My phone showed no signal. Of course not. That's why I'd chosen this place. The thing outside moved across the porch with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall made the old boards groan. It stopped in front of the cabin's front door. I heard that wet clicking sound again, closer now, followed by what sounded like claws scraping against wood. I had two choices. I could stay in the bedroom and hope it went away, or I could try to get a look at whatever was out there. The rational part of my brain said to stay put. But there was another part. The part that made me stop to look at car accidents. The part that made me read about true crime before bed. That needed to know. I crept to my bedroom door and eased it open, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. The cabin's main room was dark except for a slice of moonlight coming through the front windows. The scratching at the door had stopped. My bare feet made no sound on the floor as I moved forward. I could see the door now, a solid piece of oak with a small window at head height. The moonlight was bright enough that I should be able to see anything large moving out there. I was 10 feet from the door when a shadow passed across the window. My heart slammed against my ribs. The shadow had been too tall, too wrong in its proportions to be human. I raised the flashlight but kept it off, not sure if I really wanted to illuminate whatever was on the other side of that door. The door handle rattled, not like something was trying to turn it, more like something was testing it, exploring what it was. The rattling stopped and I heard that clicking sound right on the other side of the door, followed by what could have been sniffing. My curiosity finally overcame my fear. I thumbed the flashlight switch and aimed it at the window. Two eyes reflected the beam back at me, but they were all wrong. They were huge, the size of softballs, and they glowed a pale green like a cat's eyes in headlights. But these weren't cat's eyes. They were set too wide apart, and they were looking down at me from at least 7 feet off the ground. I stumbled backward, the flashlight beam jerking away from the window. When I got it aimed back, the eyes were gone, but now I could hear movement on the porch. Lots of movement, like something big was pacing back and forth. The clicking sound came again, but this time I could see what was making it. A long, pale appendage, something between an arm and a tentacle, snaked into view through the window. It was a sickly white color and jointed in all the wrong places. The clicking came from what looked like hard ridges or plates running along its length. The appendage probed at the window frame, testing it. My back hit the kitchen counter. I fumbled behind me without taking my eyes off the window, and my hand closed around a knife handle in the dish drain. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The appendage withdrew from the window. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the whole door shuddered in its frame as something slammed against it from outside. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The door held, but another impact made the hinges creak. Whatever was out there was trying to get in, and based on the force of those hits, the door wouldn't hold for long. I ran back to the bedroom, my feet slapping against the floor. I grabbed my phone and car keys, pulled on the first pair of pants I could find, and shoved my feet into my boots without bothering with socks. Another crash from the front door, louder this time, the bedroom window. It was my only way out. I could hear the front door splintering as I wrestled with the window's old paint-stuck frame. It finally came loose with a screech of wood on wood. The cool night air hit my face as I stuck my head out and looked down. The bedroom window was about 6 feet off the ground, a hard landing but survivable. Behind me, I heard the front door finally give way with a crack of breaking wood. I didn't hesitate. I dove through the window head first, tucking my shoulder like I remembered from high school sports. I hit the ground and rolled, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The flashlight went flying into the darkness. As I struggled to my feet, gasping for air, I heard something large moving through the cabin. The sound of furniture being knocked over, of claws or talons scraping across wood. It knew I'd been there moments ago. I ran. The rental car was parked 30 yards away, just visible in the moonlight. Behind me, I heard the creature moving fast through the cabin. The window frame splintered as something much too big shoved its way through it. I fumbled with the key fob, pressing the unlock button repeatedly. The car's lights flashed and I heard the locks click. Almost there. 10 more yards. Something hit the ground behind me with a heavy thud. The clicking sound was faster now, excited. I could hear it moving, its strange gait covering ground quickly. 5 yards to the car. I reached for the door handle. A pale shape rose up in my peripheral vision. Something wrapped around my ankle, one of those wrong jointed appendages, its surface rough like sandpaper. I was yanked off my feet, the key fob flying from my hand. I hit the ground hard. The thing started dragging me backward toward the darkness beyond the car. I kicked out with my free leg and connected with something solid. The grip on my ankle loosened for a moment. I rolled onto my back, pulling the knife from my pocket. In the moonlight, I finally got a clear look at what had me. It was huge, 9 feet tall at least, its body a pale white that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The main mass of its body was vaguely humanoid, but that's where any resemblance to anything normal ended. 4 of those jointed appendages extended from its torso, each one at least 8 feet long. They moved independently, weaving through the air like snakes. Its head was the worst part. It was too wide, with no real face to speak of. Just those huge green eyes and what looked like a mass of smaller tentacles where a mouth should be. The tentacles writhed and twisted, and that clicking sound came from small, hard plates running along their length. The creature pulled me closer. I slashed out with the knife, catching one of the appendages. A clear fluid leaked from the cut, and the creature made a sound. A high-pitched keening that made my teeth hurt. It released my ankle. I scrambled backward, got my feet under me, and ran. Not for the car, I'd lost the keys in the scuffle, and looking for them would take too long. Instead, I ran for the trees. I could hear it pursuing me, its strange locomotion covering ground fast. The forest was dark, but the moonlight provided enough illumination to avoid running straight into trees. Branches whipped at my face as I ran. The thing behind me moved through the underbrush like it wasn't there, that clicking sound getting closer. I lost track of how long I ran. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I could still hear it behind me, never more than 20 yards back. Sometimes it would get closer and I'd feel one of those appendages swish through the air just behind my head. The ground started to slope upward. I was running uphill now, my already burning legs protesting the extra effort. But I knew this area from hiking earlier. There was an old fire tower at the top of this hill. If I could reach it, maybe I could... I didn't get to finish that thought. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard. Before I could get up, something wrapped around my waist and lifted me into the air. I was turned around to face the creature. Those giant green eyes stared at me, and the massive tentacles around its mouth region writhed faster. Up close, I could smell it, a strange chemical smell like ozone and rotting vegetation. More of those appendages wrapped around my arms and legs, holding me spread eagle in the air. The knife was still in my hand, but I couldn't move my arm enough to use it. The creature brought my face close to its own, those mouth tentacles reaching toward me. That's when I heard the helicopter. The sound was distant at first, but growing louder quickly. The creature's head snapped up, those big eyes reflecting moonlight as it looked toward the sound. The grip on my limbs loosened slightly. A bright light suddenly swept over us as the helicopter crested the hill. The creature made that keening sound again and dropped me. I hit the ground hard but managed to roll away. The helicopter was military. I could see that now. A spotlight mounted on its side illuminated the creature, which was backing away from the light. More helicopters appeared over the hill, all training spotlights on the creature. Men were fast roping down from the helicopters now, dressed in what looked like hazmat suits. They carried strange-looking weapons that hummed with electricity. The creature keened again and tried to retreat, but it was surrounded. Blue-white lightning arced from the weapons, striking the creature. It convulsed, those long appendages thrashing wildly. More bolts hit it until it finally collapsed. Someone grabbed my arm. I spun around, knife raised, but it was another person in a hazmat suit. "Mr. Peterson?" a voice said through the suit's speaker. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, Department of Special Containment. We need you to come with us." I looked back at the creature. Men in suits were approaching it cautiously, weapons ready. One of them was unfolding what looked like a large metallic net. What is that thing?" I asked. "That's classified," Agent Chen said. "But you're not the first person to encounter one. Come on, we need to get you debriefed, and you'll need to sign some paperwork." She led me toward one of the helicopters that had landed in a small clearing. As we walked, I could hear the creature being loaded into some kind of container. "There are more of them?" I asked. Agent Chen was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Peterson, the best thing you can do right now is try to forget this ever happened. Trust me on that." I looked back one last time. The creature was almost completely covered by the metallic net now. One of those long, pale appendages twitched once, then went still. The helicopter lifted off a few minutes later. Through the window, I could see more helicopters arriving, carrying what looked like large pieces of equipment. Agent Chen handed me a thick stack of papers and a pen. "Start with the non-disclosure agreement," she said. "And Mr. Peterson? Welcome to a much bigger world than you knew existed." I started signing papers as the helicopter turned south, leaving behind my rental cabin and the thing that had been waiting in the darkness. But even as we flew away, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more of them out there, hiding in remote places waiting to be found. Or maybe I thought as I signed another form, waiting to find us. I never should have bought this house. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in my bedroom, back pressed against the headboard, listening to the heavy footsteps downstairs. They're moving through my kitchen right now. I can tell because the old linoleum floor squeaks in that specific way, the same way it does when I walk across it. But I'm not walking across it. I'm up here, gripping my phone, trying to decide if I should call the police. Again. The thing is, they've already been here twice. Both times they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder, just those damn muddy boot prints that keep appearing every morning. It started 3 weeks ago, right after I closed on the house. I got it for a steal. Foreclosure, needed work, but the bones were good. That's what my realtor kept saying. The bones are good, Mark. Yeah, the bones might be good, but something else isn't right here. The first morning after I moved in, I found them. Muddy boot prints on the front porch, size 12 or 13 work boots from the treads. They led right up to my front door, then disappeared. At first, I thought maybe it was the previous owner, coming back to check on the place out of habit. But when I asked around, I learned he'd died 6 months ago. Heart attack in the upstairs bathroom. I cleaned the prints off the porch that morning. The mud was thick, reddish-brown, like clay. But it hadn't rained in weeks, and the ground around the house was bone dry. I checked the whole property. No matching footprints anywhere else. No source for that particular type of mud. The next morning they were back. Same size, same mud, same pattern leading to the door. I cleaned them again, and again the next day, and the next. For 2 weeks straight, every single morning, those boot prints would appear overnight. I installed security cameras. Nothing showed up on the footage. The prints would just be there in the morning like they materialized out of thin air. I called the police the first time after reviewing that footage. They came out, took a report, found nothing. Called them again 3 days later. Same result. The neighbors haven't seen anything unusual. Mrs. Rodriguez next door has one of those Ring doorbells. Nothing on her footage either. I even put down flour on the porch one night, thinking I'd catch other prints or signs of tampering. In the morning, the boot prints were there in the flour, but they hadn't disturbed the rest of it. Like someone just stepped down from above. I started sleeping badly. Every little noise would jerk me awake. I'd lie there in the dark, straining to hear anything out of place. But there was never anything definitive, just the normal settling sounds of an old house. At least that's what I told myself. Until tonight. I went to bed around 11, same as usual. Checked all the doors and windows, locked. Security system armed, cameras running. I just started to drift off when I heard it. A distinct footstep on the front porch. That hollow wooden sound of a boot on old boards. My eyes snapped open. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, listening. Another step, then another. They crossed the porch slowly, deliberately. When they reached the door, I heard something that made my skin crawl. The sound of a key turning in the lock. But that was impossible. I'd had all the locks changed when I moved in. I had the only keys. The door opened. The hinges didn't even creak. They never do. I'd oiled them myself last weekend. The footsteps entered my house. That's when I grabbed my phone and retreated to my bedroom. I wanted to run to get out of the house, but the footsteps were in the foyer between me and the front door. The back door was downstairs too. I was trapped up here. They're in the living room now. The footsteps are slow, methodical, like they're searching for something or someone. My phone shows no signal. Of course it doesn't. It never has good reception in this house. One of the many quirks I was planning to fix. The footsteps are moving to the stairs. The first step creaks. It always does. Another thing on my to-do list. Second step. Third. They're coming up. I press myself harder against the headboard. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. Fourth step. Fifth. The footsteps reach the landing. They pause. I'm holding my breath. In the darkness, I can see a shadow pass across the crack under my door. The handle starts to turn. The door opens. Nothing. Just empty darkness in the hallway. But the footsteps, I hear them in my room now, on my hardwood floors. Getting closer to my bed. The weight of something heavy sits on the edge of my mattress. I feel the springs compress. I squeeze my eyes shut. This isn't real. It can't be real. You bought my house. The voice is deep, gravelly, like someone who smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years. I force my eyes open. There's no one there. but the weight on my mattress remains. Your house? My voice comes out as a whisper. Lived here 43 years. Died here too, upstairs bathroom. Heart gave out while I was fixing the leaky shower head. The voice comes from the empty space at the foot of my bed. Still needs fixing, by the way. My mind races to the disclosure documents. The previous owner, Harold Mitchell, died in the house 6 months ago. His kids sold it to the bank. The bank sold it to me. Mr. Mitchell? A low chuckle. Call me Harry. Everyone did. Why are you here? This is my house. The weight shifts on the mattress. Spent my whole life fixing it up. Never quite finished. Always something else to do. But you're dead? Yeah. Doesn't mean I'm done here, though. I swallow hard. My throat is dry. The boot prints. Had to check on the place. Make sure you're taking care of it. Another shift in the mattress. You've been doing okay. Oiled those hinges nice. But that shower head's still dripping. Furnace filter needs changing too. This is insane. I'm talking to an empty room. Maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe I've finally cracked under the stress. Not dreaming, son. Not crazy either. Just having a conversation with the previous owner. The voice moves closer. Look, I'm not here to scare you. Well, not anymore. Had my fun with the boots, I'll admit. But really, I just want to make sure my house is in good hands. So, you're not going to hurt me? A snort. What for? You seem like a decent guy. Taking care of the place, making improvements. That's all I ever wanted. Someone to love this old house like I did. The weight lifts from my mattress. Footsteps move toward my door. I'll stop with the boot prints. Was getting tired of that anyway. But I'll be around, keeping an eye on things. The footsteps pause at the doorway. Oh, and check that furnace filter tomorrow. Trust me on that one. The footsteps move down the hallway, down the stairs, through the living room. The front door opens and closes. Then silence. I sit there for hours waiting for sunrise. When the first light finally creeps through my window, I force myself to get up. My legs are shaky, but I make myself walk downstairs. There are boot prints on my floor. Big ones, size 12 or 13, made of reddish-brown mud. They lead from my front door, through the house, up the stairs, into my room, and back out again. I follow them to my basement door. Something compels me to go down and check the furnace. The filter is black with dust, completely clogged. I change it right then and there. When I come back upstairs, the boot prints are gone. Every last one of them. That was 2 months ago. I haven't seen any more boot prints since then. But sometimes when I'm working on the house, I hear a grunt of approval or a muttered suggestion about what tool would work better. Once, when I was about to cut a pipe without turning off the water main, a gruff voice said, "Wouldn't do that if I were you." I've stopped being afraid. Now when I hear those heavy footsteps at night, I just smile and say, "Evening, Harry." Sometimes he answers, sometimes he doesn't. But I know he's watching, making sure his house is in good hands. I check the furnace filter regularly now. Haven't gotten around to fixing that shower head yet, though. But I will. After all, I've got a very persistent previous owner making sure I keep up with the maintenance. You might think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But here's the thing. I've never felt safer in a house. How many people can say they have a ghost as their home inspector? Oh, and if you're wondering about those security cameras I installed, they're still running. Still don't show anything. But every once in a while, when I review the footage, I catch a weird static flicker. And if I pause it just right, sometimes I can make out what looks like a tall figure in work boots carrying a tool belt. I guess some people never really leave their homes. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they stick around to help you make it your home too. The shower's dripping again. I should probably fix that. I think I hear footsteps heading toward the bathroom. Sounds like Harry's getting impatient. Better get my tools. I shouldn't have gone back to that creek. Looking back now, every rational part of me knows that. But I did go back again and again until I found out what those whispers meant. I wish I hadn't. It started 3 weeks ago on what should have been a normal hiking trip with my friends Mike and Sarah. We'd done this trail dozens of times before. It was our go-to weekend escape from Boston, a 4-hour drive into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The Lancaster Trail wasn't on any tourist maps. Mike had discovered it years ago during his Forest Service days, and we liked it that way. No crowds, no selfie-taking tourists, just pure wilderness. The morning started like any other. We parked Mike's Subaru at the unmarked trailhead at 7 a.m. sharp. The air was crisp, early October in New England, when the leaves are just starting to turn but haven't peaked yet. Sarah handed out the trail mix she always made, heavy on the M&Ms, light on the raisins. She knew my preferences. Mike did his usual equipment check, making sure we had enough water and our emergency gear was in order. We'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I first noticed something was off. The trail had been winding steadily uphill, following an old logging road before veering off into denser forest. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost convinced myself it was just the wind in the trees. Almost. "Hold up," I said, stopping in my tracks. Mike and Sarah continued a few steps before turning back. "What's up, Dan?" Mike asked, adjusting his pack. "You guys hear that?" They both went quiet, listening. The forest sounds continued. Wind in the branches, a woodpecker somewhere in the distance, the crunch of leaves under our boots. "Hear what?" Sarah asked after a moment. I held up my hand for silence again. There it was. A whisper, like someone talking very quietly just at the edge of hearing. It seemed to be coming from off-trail, down toward where I could hear running water. "There's someone down there," I said, pointing toward the sound of the creek. Mike shook his head. "We're 8 miles from the nearest road, Dan. Nobody comes out here. I'm telling you, I hear voices, like whispers." Sarah gave me that look she gets when she thinks I'm being dramatic. It's probably just the water. Sound carries weird in the mountains. I wanted to believe her. It would have been easier, but I knew what I heard wasn't water. Water doesn't form words, even if you can't quite make them out. "I'm going to check it out," I said, already stepping off the trail. "Dan, come on," Mike called after me. "We've got 4 more miles to the camping spot." 5 minutes. Just let me look." The slope down to the creek was steep and slippery with wet leaves. I had to grab onto saplings to keep from sliding. The whispers got clearer as I descended. Definitely voices, definitely more than one, speaking in low, urgent tones. But I still couldn't make out the words. The creek came into view through the trees. It wasn't much more than a stream, really, maybe 6 feet across, tumbling over moss-covered rocks. The whispers were loud now, seeming to come from just around a bend in the creek bed. "Hello?" I called out. The whispers stopped instantly. I moved forward carefully, scanning the area. There was nobody there. No camping gear, no footprints in the mud by the water's edge, no signs anyone had been there at all. The only sound was the running water. "Dan," Mike's voice came from up on the trail. "You okay down there?" "Yeah," I called back, still looking around. "I'll be right up." I stood there for another minute, trying to understand what I'd heard. The whispers didn't return. Eventually, I made my way back up to my friends. "Find your mystery people?" Sarah asked with a slight smirk. "No," I admitted, "but I swear I heard something." "Probably just tired," Mike said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Come on, let's make some miles." We continued hiking, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Every few minutes I'd catch myself straining to hear the whispers again. They didn't return, but the memory of them stayed with me. We made it to our camping spot just before sunset. It was a small clearing on a ridge, with a fire pit previous hikers had built. As Mike and Sarah set up their tent, I gathered firewood, trying to stay busy to keep my mind off what had happened. That night around the campfire, I almost brought it up again. But I could already imagine their reactions. More concerned looks, more gentle suggestions that I was just tired or imagining things. So I kept quiet, roasting marshmallows and listening to Mike's story about the bear he'd encountered last summer. We hiked out the next morning without incident. The whispers didn't return, and by the time we reached the car, I'd almost convinced myself Sarah was right. Just water sounds playing tricks on my ears. That should have been the end of it. A weird experience to tell at parties, nothing more. But 3 days later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was sitting at my desk at work, supposedly reviewing quarterly reports, but really just staring at my computer screen, replaying those whispers in my head. I opened Google and started searching. At first, I just looked up the general area: Lancaster Trail, White Mountains, hiking reports. Nothing unusual came up. Then I tried adding terms like strange sounds and whispers. Still nothing. I was about to give up when I found an old forum post from 2012. Someone hiking in the same area had reported hearing voices in the woods near a stream. The post didn't have many details, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. That night, I dug deeper. I found local newspaper archives going back to the 1950s. Most of it was usual small-town news: county fairs, town meetings, lost dogs. But in 1978, there was a story that caught my eye. A search and rescue operation for a missing hiker had focused on an area near Lancaster Trail. They never found him, but one of the rescue team members reported hearing strange voices during the search. I had to know more. I called in sick to work on Friday and drove back up to New Hampshire. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something there, something important. This time, I came prepared. I brought a digital voice recorder, a better flashlight, and a more detailed map of the area. I also brought my GPS to mark exactly where I'd heard the whispers. The trail felt different alone. Every snapping twig made me jump. The forest seemed darker, more closed in. It took me longer to reach the spot without Mike setting the pace, but around noon, I recognized the section of trail where we'd stopped before. I marked my location on the GPS and started down toward the creek again. The slope seemed steeper than I remembered. Halfway down, I turned on the voice recorder. The creek was running higher than last time. We'd had rain earlier in the week. I stood there for a long time, just listening. Nothing but water sounds and bird calls. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish. "Is anyone there?" No response. I walked along the creek bank, careful not to slip on the wet rocks. After about 10 minutes, I was ready to give up. Then I heard it. The whispers started so quietly I almost missed them, but they were there, clearer than before. Multiple voices, speaking quickly, urgently. They seemed to be coming from the other side of the creek. I fumbled with the voice recorder, making sure it was still running. Carefully, I stepped onto the first rock to cross the creek. The whispers got louder. I could almost make out words now. Halfway across the creek, my foot slipped. I caught myself before falling, but the voice recorder wasn't so lucky. It flew from my hand and hit a rock before falling into the water. I watched helplessly as the current carried it downstream. The whispers stopped again. I stood there on that rock in the middle of the creek, heart pounding, wondering what to do next. That's when I noticed something strange about the opposite bank. There was a small opening in the rocks I hadn't seen before, partially hidden by ferns. It looked like the entrance to a cave or tunnel. The whispers started again, definitely coming from that direction. I knew I should leave. Everything I'd learned about wilderness safety told me not to enter unknown caves alone, but I'd come too far to turn back now. I finished crossing the creek and approached the opening. It was larger than it had looked from the creek, about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. The whispers were clearer now, but I still couldn't make out the words. They seemed to be coming from deep inside. I took out my flashlight and shined it into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel sloping downward. The walls were smooth, almost too smooth to be natural. Water trickled down one side, and the air coming from inside was cold. I had to crouch to enter. The tunnel extended about 20 feet before making a sharp turn to the right. The whispers echoed off the walls, making it impossible to tell how far away they were. After the turn, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. My flashlight beam showed more tunnel openings leading off in different directions. The whispers seemed to be coming from all of them now, overlapping and echoing until they were just a constant susurration of unintelligible voices. I took another step forward. My foot hit something that clattered across the rocky floor. I swung my flashlight down. It was a camera, an old one, covered in dust, but otherwise intact. I picked it up with trembling hands. The brand name had worn off, but it looked like it was from the 1970s. The whispers got louder. I could almost understand them now, almost make out what they were saying. I took another step forward. My flashlight flickered. I froze. The light flickered again, then went out completely. The darkness was absolute. The whispers surrounded me now, and for the first time, I could understand the words. They were saying my name. I ran. I don't remember dropping the camera. I don't remember finding my way back through the tunnel. My next clear memory is breaking out into daylight, gasping for air, my clothes soaked with creek water and cave mud. I didn't stop running until I reached the trail. My hands were bleeding from grabbing rocks and trees, but I barely felt it. I made it back to my car in half the time it had taken me to hike in. That night in my apartment back in Boston, I finally looked up the news story about the missing hiker from 1978. His name was Daniel Morrison. He was carrying a camera when he disappeared. I haven't been back to Lancaster Trail. Mike and Sarah have invited me hiking several times, but I always find an excuse not to go. They wouldn't understand. Sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, I think I can hear whispers again. They're probably just the pipes in my building or traffic from the street below. Probably. But I keep thinking about that camera, lying there in the darkness. And I wonder, if someone found it now, would the film inside still be intact? Would it show what happened to Daniel Morrison? Would it show what's really down there in those tunnels? I don't want to know the answers. But sometimes, in my dreams, the whispers tell me anyway. Last week, I got a letter. No return address, just my name and address typed on a plain envelope. Inside was a single photograph, badly damaged by water and time. Most of it was too faded to make out, but in one corner, I could clearly see a tunnel entrance in a rocky bank, partially hidden by ferns. I burned the photograph. Then I changed my phone number and deleted my social media accounts. I'm moving next month to Arizona, somewhere dry, somewhere far from forests and mountains and hidden streams. But part of me knows it won't matter, because the whispers aren't coming from that cave, not really. They're coming from somewhere else, somewhere much closer. And they know my name now. They know my name, and they're getting louder. The first message appeared 3 days after I moved in. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed it forming in the condensation on the mirror. Get out while you can. The letters were backwards, like someone had written them from inside the glass. I wiped it away immediately, but my hand was shaking so badly I dropped my toothbrush in the sink. I'd taken the room because it was cheap and close to downtown Seattle. The Craigslist ad had mentioned 2 other roommates, but I hadn't met them yet. Our schedules didn't align. I heard them sometimes, moving around in their rooms or in the kitchen, but we were like ships passing in the night. The apartment itself was nothing special. Beige walls, worn carpet, furniture that had seen better days. But it was a roof over my head while I got back on my feet after my divorce. That first morning, I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Sleep deprivation from the move, stress from the separation, whatever. I went to work at the accounting firm like nothing had happened. But when I came home and took my evening shower, there it was again. The others didn't listen. The steam from the hot water made the letters appear slowly, one by one, like invisible fingers dragging through the condensation. I cleaned the mirror thoroughly with Windex, making sure to get every corner. The next morning, a new message. They never leave. My hands were sweating as I wiped it away. I started taking photos with my phone to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. After a week, I began documenting everything in a notebook. The messages appeared twice daily, always when I showered or when the mirror fogged up from sink steam. They never repeated exactly, but they all carried the same warning tone. Watch your back. Don't sleep too deeply. Check the locks. They're always watching. I installed a small security camera in the bathroom, pointing it at the mirror. The footage showed nothing. The messages just appeared in the condensation as if by themselves. No hands, no movement, nothing unusual except the words forming letter by letter in reverse. The sound of my roommates became more noticeable. Footsteps in the hall at odd hours. Cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen at 3 a.m. Sometimes I'd wake up to find things in my room slightly moved. My laptop shifted an inch to the left. My shoes arranged differently by the door. My coffee mug on the opposite side of the desk. I tried leaving notes for my roommates under their doors. "Hey, would love to meet up and chat sometime." No response. I knocked on their doors during reasonable hours, but no one ever answered. The rent was automatically deducted from my account each month, so I had no reason to contact the landlord. The messages grew more urgent. Check behind the walls. Listen for the scratching. Count the shadows. They move at night. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. I bought a high-powered flashlight and kept it by my bed. During the day, I'd press my ear against the walls, trying to hear what was happening in the other rooms. Sometimes I caught fragments of conversations, but they were too muffled to make out the words. One night I woke up to use the bathroom and found all the kitchen cabinets standing open. Every single one. The refrigerator door was ajar too, casting a pale light across the linoleum. I knew I hadn't left them that way. I barely cooked, just heated up microwave meals and made coffee. I started taking pictures of everything before I left for work and comparing them when I got home. Small things were always different. The angle of the couch cushions, the position of magazines on the coffee table, the arrangement of dishes in the drain rack. Nothing major, nothing I could definitively prove wasn't just my own forgetfulness, but enough to keep me constantly on edge. The messages continued. They're getting closer. Don't turn your back. Watch the corners. Time is running out. I tried to record the sounds at night. My phone picked up footsteps, whispers, the sound of furniture being dragged across carpet. But when I checked the apartment in the morning, nothing was out of place, at least not obviously. I started spending more time at work, coming home as late as possible and leaving early in the morning. My co-workers noticed the changes in me, the dark circles under my eyes, my jumpiness, how I'd zone out during meetings. My boss suggested I take some time off to rest. I couldn't tell him that my apartment was the last place I wanted to be. 2 months in, I was sitting on my bed one night, trying to read a book, but really just listening to the sounds of the apartment, when I heard something new. A scratching noise, coming from inside the wall behind my headboard. Not mice. The sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic, like someone dragging their fingernails across the drywall in a pattern. I pressed my ear against the wall. The scratching stopped immediately. Then I heard what sounded like breathing, slow, raspy inhales and exhales, just on the other side of the wall. I jerked away so fast I knocked my lamp off the nightstand. The next morning's message was different. They know you heard. I started researching the apartment building's history. It was built in the 1970s. Nothing remarkable. No reported deaths, no mysterious disappearances. Nothing that would explain what was happening. I tried to find previous tenants online, but came up empty. The messages grew more specific. Check the air vents. What's behind the mirror? Count your steps at night. They use the pipes. I unscrewed the air vent cover in my room and shone the flashlight inside. The beam revealed nothing but dust and cobwebs, but I swore I could hear movement further down the shaft, a sliding, shuffling sound that stopped as soon as I noticed it. The mirror became an obsession. I examined it from every angle, looking for hidden mechanisms or signs of tampering. It was a normal bathroom mirror, mounted flush against the wall, but when I tapped it, the sound was hollow, like there was space behind it. One evening, I decided to remove the mirror entirely. I waited until I heard no movement in the apartment, then grabbed my tools. The mirror was heavier than I expected, and it took some effort to work it free from the wall. Behind it was a rectangular opening about 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. The space beyond was dark, but my flashlight beam revealed a narrow passage that seemed to extend further than it should have, given the building's layout. The walls of the passage were covered in writing. Thousands of backwards letters scratched into the surface, overlapping and intertwining. Some looked fresh, others were old enough to have gathered dust. I heard movement in the passage, a quick scuttling sound like something retreating deeper into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight caught nothing but shadow. My hands shaking, I quickly remounted the mirror. That night, I slept in my car. The next morning, I had to go back for my work clothes. The message on the mirror was waiting. Now you know where we live. I started plotting my escape. I couldn't break the lease without losing my security deposit, and I couldn't afford to pay rent on 2 places. But the messages were getting more frequent, appearing even when the mirror wasn't fogged. We see you planning. You can't escape us. We're in the walls. We're in the pipes. We're in the vents. We're everywhere. The sounds at night grew louder. Scratching in the walls, whispers in the vents, footsteps in the hallway that stopped right outside my door. I barricaded myself in my room, only leaving for work and essential trips to the bathroom. 3 months after moving in, I woke at 3 a.m. to complete silence. The usual ambient sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the whir of the heating system, the creaks and groans of the building, were gone. The silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, straining to hear something, anything. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the other side of my bedroom door. Not at the bottom where a mouse might scrabble, but at eye level, like someone, or something, was writing on the wood. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it at the door. In the beam, I could see letters appearing on the surface, carved into the wood from the outside, appearing stroke by stroke in real time. We want to meet you. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, I went straight to work and started searching for a new apartment during my lunch break. I found a studio across town that I could move into immediately if I paid 2 months' rent up front. It would drain my savings, but I didn't care. I went back to the apartment that evening with empty boxes, planning to pack as quickly as possible. The message on the mirror was longer than usual. You can leave, but we'll follow. We always follow. Ask the others. As I was throwing clothes into boxes, I heard a door open somewhere in the apartment, then another. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, approaching from both directions. I grabbed my pre-packed emergency bag and yanked open my bedroom window. The fire escape was right there, just as I'd planned. I climbed out just as my bedroom door began to open. I didn't look back. I ran down the fire escape, metal clanging under my feet, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. My bedroom window was dark, but I swore I could see faces pressed against the glass. Faces that weren't quite right. Faces that seemed to be made of shadow and fog. I stayed in a hotel that night and hired movers the next day to get my remaining belongings. They reported nothing unusual about the apartment. My roommate's doors were closed, as always. I moved into the studio apartment and tried to put the experience behind me. For a week, everything was normal. Then one morning, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed condensation forming on my new bathroom mirror. Letters began to appear, backward as always. Welcome home. I immediately called my landlord and asked about the previous tenants. He sounded confused. The apartment had been empty for 6 months before I moved in. No one would rent it because of the strange noises in the walls. That night, I heard the first scratch from inside the heating vent. I broke my lease the next day and moved in with a friend in Portland. I sleep on his couch and contribute to rent, but I don't care. At least here, the mirrors stay clear and the walls don't whisper. Sometimes, though, when I'm alone in the bathroom, I find myself staring at the mirror, waiting for words to appear. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see letters starting to form in the steam. But I always wipe them away before I can read what they say. I don't want to know if they followed me here. I don't want to know what they want. And most of all, I don't want to know what happened to my old roommates. The ones whose doors were always closed. The ones I never saw. The ones who might not have been there at all. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some mysteries should stay buried in the walls, behind the mirrors, in the spaces we pretend don't exist. But every now and then, When I hear an unexpected sound in the night or catch a movement in my peripheral vision, I remember those backwards letters forming in the steam. They always follow. And I wonder how far I'll have to run before they stop. The first thing I noticed when I took over my father's furniture company wasn't the outdated accounting software, or the stack of unpaid invoices on his desk, or even the ancient coffee maker that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. It was the heavy padlock on that storage unit door in the basement, its brass surface dulled by decades of dust. I found the key buried in the bottom drawer of Dad's desk, underneath warranties for equipment we didn't even own anymore. The metal was cold against my palm as I stood in front of that door, listening to water drip somewhere in the darkness of the basement. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed off the concrete walls. The storage unit smelled like old wood and mothballs. I pulled the chain for the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, and yellow light spilled across what looked like my grandmother's entire estate sale collection. Antique furniture was crammed into every corner. Victorian chairs with cracked leather upholstery, end tables with water rings on their surfaces, a massive wardrobe that barely fit through the door. But it was the dolls that caught my eye. Dozens of them, arranged on shelves that lined the walls. Porcelain faces with painted-on smiles and glass eyes that reflected the dim light. I recognized some of them from my grandmother's house. She'd been a collector, always dragging home new finds from estate sales and antique shops. Dad had inherited everything when she passed away 5 years ago. I guess he couldn't bring himself to sell any of it. I was checking the condition of a Queen Anne chair when I heard it, a soft scraping sound like something being dragged across wood. I turned around. Nothing seemed different, but I could have sworn one of the dolls on the middle shelf had been facing the other direction. I blamed it on the bad lighting and my exhausted brain. I'd been working 16-hour days trying to get the company's finances in order since Dad's stroke 3 weeks ago. The doctor said he'd recover, but the business couldn't wait. Someone had to take charge. I locked up the storage unit and went back to my office. That night, I dreamed about glass eyes watching me in the dark. The next morning, I found the chair I'd been examining pushed into the center of the storage room. I distinctly remembered leaving it against the wall. My first thought was that one of the employees must have come down here, but the padlock had been secure when I arrived. I approached the chair slowly. The leather was cracked and peeling, showing the yellowed padding underneath. As I reached out to touch it, I heard that scraping sound again, louder this time, coming from behind me. I spun around. One of the dolls had fallen face down on the shelf. I picked it up, noting its weight and the intricate lace detail on its dress. When I set it upright, I noticed something odd. There was dust on the shelf everywhere except for a long streak leading to where I'd found the doll. My phone rang, making me jump. It was our biggest client threatening to pull their account. I spent the rest of the day in damage control mode, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right in that basement. That night I stayed late at the office, going through old contracts. Around midnight I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The security system was armed. Nobody else should have been in the building. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and walked down the hall. Empty. But as I passed the basement door, I heard that scraping sound again, clearer than ever. It was followed by a soft thump. My hand shook as I unlocked the basement door. The storage unit was still secured, but now I could hear movement inside, like something being slowly dragged across the floor. I stood there for what felt like hours, key in hand, trying to convince myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe rats had gotten in somehow. Maybe the old building was just settling. The scraping stopped. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of porcelain fingers tapping against wood. I unlocked the padlock. The chain clinked as I pulled it free. Heart pounding, I opened the door. The chair had moved again, now positioned directly in front of the entrance. Sitting in it was one of the larger dolls, a Victorian-style figure in a blue dress that I definitely remembered seeing on the top shelf earlier. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, glass eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight. I backed away slowly, but before I could reach the door, I heard movement behind me. I turned to see another doll actually walking, across a shelf on unsteady porcelain legs. Its tiny boots made clicking sounds against the wood. More movement caught my eye. All around the room, dolls were beginning to stir. Small heads turned. Jointed arms began to reach out. I ran. I slammed the door shut and fumbled with the padlock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the key. From inside, I heard the scraping sound getting louder, accompanied by the click of dozens of tiny feet on the floor. The lock finally caught. I stumbled backward, breathing hard. Something hit the other side of the door with a solid thunk, then another impact, and another. I made it up the stairs somehow and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I spent the rest of the night in a hotel, telling myself I was having some kind of breakdown from stress and exhaustion. Things like this didn't happen in real life. They couldn't. But when I arrived at work the next morning, I found the storage unit door standing wide open. The padlock lay on the floor, still locked, its hasp somehow twisted completely off its mounting. Inside, every single piece of furniture had been arranged in a perfect circle around that chair. And every single doll was sitting exactly where it had been 2 days ago, posed primly on their shelves with painted-on smiles and glass eyes that seemed to follow my movement. I spent that morning researching the building's history, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. The company had been in the family for 3 generations, operating out of the same converted warehouse since my grandfather's time. Before that, the records showed it had been a furniture factory in the early 1900s. Nothing unusual stood out. Then I found an old newspaper article about a fire in 1912. The factory had burned, killing several workers. According to the article, they'd been trapped in the basement storage area. The paper mentioned that one of the victims had been a young woman who made dolls in her spare time, selling them to supplement her income. I printed the article and took it down to the basement. My hands were steady this time as I unlocked the storage unit. The furniture was still arranged in that perfect circle. I walked to the center and sat down in the chair. "I know you're here," I said out loud, feeling slightly ridiculous. "I know what happened to you. I'm sorry." Nothing moved. The only sound was my own breathing and that eternal drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Then I heard it, that familiar scraping sound. One of the dolls on the middle shelf turned its head to look at me. Then another, and another. Soon every glass eye in the room was fixed on my face. The largest doll, the one in the blue dress, stood up. Its porcelain feet clicked against the wood as it walked to the edge of the shelf. It stopped there, looking down at me. "This was your place," I said. "You worked here. You made dolls here." The doll's head tilted slightly. Behind it, I could see others starting to move, climbing down from their shelves with jerky movements. They gathered around the blue-dressed doll like children around a teacher. "I don't want to take this space from you," I continued. "But I need to run this business. My father's sick. The company will fail if someone doesn't take charge." The blue-dressed doll took another step forward, then another. It walked right off the edge of the shelf. I started to lunge forward, but before it could fall, it stopped, floating in midair. The other dolls followed, drifting down from their shelves like leaves in autumn. They formed a circle around my chair, looking up at me with their glass eyes. The blue-dressed doll floated up until it was at eye level with me. This close, I could see the fine cracks in its porcelain skin, the way its painted lips were slightly faded at the corners. It reached out one tiny hand and pointed at the newspaper article I was still clutching. Then it pointed at the furniture around us, and finally at me. Understanding dawned. "You want to help?" The doll nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "You know this building. You worked here. You want to see it succeed?" Another nod. Around us, the other dolls had begun to move, straightening the furniture, dusting off surfaces with their tiny hands. One of them picked up a fallen table leg I hadn't even noticed and began trying to reattach it. I let out a laugh that was half relief, half hysteria. Okay. We can work something out. You can stay here. This can still be your space. Just, maybe we can figure out a way to do this that doesn't involve giving me a heart attack." The blue-dressed doll's painted lips seemed to curve up slightly at the corners. It extended its hand again, this time palm up, like it was offering to shake on our deal. I reached out with one finger, and it wrapped its tiny porcelain hand around it. Its touch was cold, but not unpleasant. That was 6 months ago. The company's doing better now. I've modernized most of our systems, brought in new clients, and even hired some additional staff. But I've kept the basement storage unit exactly as it was, though I did install better lighting and brought in some tools and materials for repairs. Every morning when I arrive, I unlock the basement door and say good morning to my unusual colleagues. They never move when anyone else is around, but sometimes I'll come down to find a piece of furniture perfectly restored overnight, or discover that they've reorganized the storage space in a way that makes more sense. The blue-dressed doll, I call her Sarah now after the name I found in that old newspaper article, seems to have appointed herself as my assistant manager. She has excellent taste in furniture and an eye for detail that comes from decades of watching this business operate. Dad's recovering slowly. I haven't told him about our new helpers yet. I'm not sure how to explain that his mother's doll collection has become an integral part of our restoration department. But the other day when he visited the workshop, he commented on how good everything looked. Just like the old days, he said, smiling, like there's still real pride in the craftsmanship. I caught a glimpse of movement from the basement door, just a flash of a blue dress disappearing into the shadows. I could have sworn I heard the faintest sound of porcelain hands clapping. Sometimes late at night when I'm working late, I'll hear music drifting up from the basement, the tinkling notes of an old music box playing a melody I don't recognize. I'll go down to find the dolls having what looks like a party, dancing in circles around that old chair. They always invite me to join them, though I mostly just watch. It's still a bit unsettling if I'm honest. But there's something oddly comforting about it too. I've learned to accept that some things in life don't need rational explanations. Sometimes you just need to trust that the past has its own way of taking care of the present. And sometimes the best business partners are the ones who've been there all along, silently watching and waiting for someone to finally notice them. The company's ledgers show a mysterious new expense category now. Restoration supplies, special projects. Every month I make sure to order new ribbons, lace, and tiny spare parts. I leave them on the shelves at night and find them transformed into perfect repairs by morning. It's an unconventional arrangement, but it works for us. And if clients sometimes comment that our restored pieces seem to have a certain life to them, a certain warmth that modern furniture lacks, well, that's just part of the family business's special touch. Though I do make sure to warn new employees about the basement. Don't mind any noises you might hear down there, I tell them. It's just the old building settling, and maybe a few other things that have settled here too. They usually laugh it off, but they also don't question why the basement door always stays locked or why I'm the only one who goes down there after hours. Some things in a family business, after all, are best kept in the family. Even if that family now includes a collection of antique dolls with glass eyes and secrets of their own. The first bang made me jump in my chair. It was 11:42 p.m., and I was alone in the converted factory building trying to finish the quarterly reports. The sound came from the old machine shop section, a sharp, metallic clang that shouldn't have been there at all. My fingers froze over the keyboard as I listened for more. The renovation company had done a decent job turning the abandoned manufacturing plant into modern office space. They'd kept the industrial charm, exposed brick walls, steel beams, and massive windows, while adding all the necessary modern amenities. But they'd left the old machine shop area mostly untouched. It sat empty behind the glass partition wall, full of shadows and silent machinery, waiting for phase 2 of the renovation that never came due to budget cuts. Another clang echoed through the building, followed by a scraping sound. My heart rate picked up. I minimized the spreadsheet on my screen and checked the security system status on my second monitor. All doors showed locked. No motion sensors had been triggered. The building was secure. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The overhead lights in my section cast a warm glow over the rows of empty desks. But beyond the glass partition, The machine shop was dark except for the dim emergency lights required by code. As I stood up, my chair squeaked against the floor. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet building. The scraping noise came again, closer this time. My palms started to sweat. I wiped my right hand on my pants and gripped the phone tighter. The rational part of my brain said it was probably just the old building settling or maybe mice in the walls. But another part of me remembered all the stories the previous tenants had told about strange sounds and movements in the shadows after hours. I walked slowly toward the glass partition, my dress shoes clicking against the polished concrete floor. The machine shop lay before me, a forest of silent industrial equipment covered in dust cloths. Drill presses, lathes, and mechanical arms stood like sleeping giants in the gloom. The emergency lights cast a faint red glow that didn't reach the dark corners. My phone flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I scanned the room. Nothing moved. But as I swept the light back and forth, I caught glimpses of shifting shadows between the machines. They seemed to flicker and dance just at the edge of the light, always disappearing when I tried to focus on them directly. The smart thing would have been to leave right then, pack up my laptop and finish the reports from home. But curiosity and stubbornness got the better of me. I had to know what was causing those sounds. I pulled out my key card and swiped it through the reader by the glass door. The lock clicked open. The air in the machine shop felt colder than the office area. My breath came out in small, visible puffs. The smell of old metal and machine oil filled my nostrils. My footsteps echoed off the high ceiling as I moved between the covered shapes. Another metallic sound rang out. A distinct tapping, like someone gently striking a pipe with a wrench. It came from the far corner of the room. I turned toward it, heart pounding in my chest. The beam of my flashlight illuminated a massive old conveyor system, partially hidden behind a sheet of dirty plastic. As I got closer, I noticed marks in the dust on the floor. Fresh scuff marks that hadn't been there earlier in the day. They led behind the conveyor. My throat felt dry. I swallowed hard and kept walking. The tapping came again, followed by a sound like grinding gears. It was definitely coming from behind the conveyor. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the plastic sheet. My hand was shaking. I took a deep breath and yanked the sheet aside. Nothing. Just more machinery and tools, covered in years of dust. But as I stood there, I felt a cold draft brush against the back of my neck. The hairs on my arms stood up. Slowly, I turned around. A shadow moved between two covered lathes about 20 feet away. This wasn't the trick of light and darkness I'd seen earlier. This was a distinct shape, person-sized, gliding smoothly across the floor. My flashlight beam caught it for just a second before it disappeared behind a drill press. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. I opened my mouth to call out, but no sound came. The rational explanations were gone now. This was something else. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my eyes on the spot where the shadow had vanished. Another metallic tap echoed through the room, this time from a different direction. Then another and another. The sounds began to multiply and overlap. Clangs, scrapes, and grinding noises coming from all around me. The shadows started moving faster now. I caught glimpses of them darting between machines, always just at the edge of my vision. My flashlight beam couldn't keep up. The temperature seemed to drop even further. My breath came in quick gasps that fogged in front of my face. I bumped into something hard and cold, one of the lathes. The impact sent a tool clattering to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the darkness. The metallic noises stopped abruptly. The shadows froze. For a moment, everything was absolutely still. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete, moving slowly and deliberately. They were coming from the direction of the glass partition, between me and the exit. My flashlight beam darted to the sound but caught only empty space. The footsteps continued, getting closer. My legs felt weak. I pressed my back against the lathe, trying to make myself as small as possible. The beam of my flashlight started to flicker. I shook it, but the light kept fading in and out. The footsteps stopped about 10 feet away. In the dying beam of my flashlight, I saw a dark figure standing motionless between two covered machines. It was roughly human-shaped, but somehow wrong. Too tall, too thin, with proportions that didn't quite make sense. As my light flickered one last time, I thought I saw it start to turn toward me. The flashlight went out completely. The emergency light seemed dimmer than before. I couldn't see the figure anymore, but I could feel it there in the darkness. The air grew so cold it hurt to breathe. A sound came from where the figure had been standing, a low, grinding noise like rusted gears trying to turn. It grew louder, mixed with the screech of metal on metal. The shadows started moving again, whirling faster and faster around me. Tools began to rattle on the workbenches. The whole room seemed to vibrate with mechanical energy. My paralysis broke. I pushed off from the lathe and ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I sprinted through the maze of machinery, bouncing off covered shapes and knocking tools to the floor. The glass partition glowed ahead of me like a beacon. The sounds chased me, clanging, scraping, and those heavy footsteps pounding on the concrete. The shadows swept past me on both sides, moving impossibly fast. The cold air burned in my lungs. Something brushed against my shoulder and I jerked away, stumbling but keeping my feet. I slammed into the glass door with my shoulder, fumbling for my keycard. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Behind me, the footsteps got closer. The card reader seemed to take forever to recognize the swipe. Finally, the lock clicked. I yanked the door open and dove through, pulling it shut behind me. The sound stopped instantly. The shadows disappeared. Through the glass, I could see the machine shop, lit only by the dim red emergency lights. Nothing moved. The dust cloths covering the machinery hung still and undisturbed. I backed away from the partition, gasping for breath. My shirt was soaked with sweat. As my breathing slowed, I noticed my phone was still clutched in my right hand, dark and dead. I pressed the power button, but nothing happened. The battery had been fully charged when I'd used it as a flashlight. I walked quickly back to my desk, grabbed my laptop and bag, and headed for the exit. I didn't look back at the machine shop. The main office lights flickered once as I passed beneath them, but stayed on. I punched in the security code with trembling fingers and practically ran to my car. As I drove home, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The rational explanations came creeping back. Old buildings make strange noises. Shadows play tricks on your eyes when you're alone and scared. An overactive imagination can make you see things that aren't there. But I knew what I'd seen and felt in that room. The cold, the shadows, the figure. I called in sick the next day. When I finally went back to work, I made sure to leave well before sunset. The machine shop stood silent behind its glass wall, looking perfectly normal in the daylight. But sometimes, when I'm working late and the office is quiet, I hear faint metallic sounds echoing from that direction. I don't investigate anymore. I pack up my things and leave. They're renovating the machine shop next month, finally doing the Phase 2 conversion into more office space. The construction crews will tear out all the old equipment and strip the room down to bare walls. Part of me wonders if they'll find anything unusual in there. A bigger part of me hopes they don't. I still work late sometimes, but never alone, and never in that building. I took a transfer to our downtown office as soon as one opened up. The commute is longer, but I don't mind. Sometimes a longer drive is worth it to avoid the things that move in the shadows of old machines, keeping their own time, following their own mechanical rhythms in the darkness. The quarterly reports? They got done eventually, but not that night. Some deadlines aren't worth the risk of meeting. Some rooms are better left unexplored, and some sounds in the night should serve as a warning rather than an invitation to investigate. I learned that lesson in the machine shop, surrounded by shadows and cold air and the echo of footsteps that shouldn't have been there. I don't know what I encountered that night. I don't want to know. But sometimes I dream about it, about the figure standing in the darkness, about the wrongness of its proportions, about the grinding sound it made as it started to turn toward me. In the dreams, my flashlight doesn't flicker and die. In the dreams, I see its face. Those are the nights I wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, grateful for the warm yellow light of my bedside lamp. Those are the nights I lie awake until dawn, listening to the normal sounds of my apartment building, telling myself that not all mechanical noises in the dark mean something is wrong. Most of the time I almost believe it, but I'll never work in an old factory building again. Some spaces keep their history in more ways than one. Some machines remember their purpose even after they've stopped running. And sometimes in the places where people once shaped metal into useful things, other things take shape in the darkness, following patterns we were never meant to understand. The company moved out of that building 6 months ago. The old factory is empty now, waiting for new tenants. Sometimes I drive past it late at night. The windows are dark, but I always think I see movement behind them. Shadows shifting in the machine shop, keeping their own time, waiting for someone else to investigate a strange sound in the night. I never stop. I never slow down. I keep driving until the old factory disappears in my rearview mirror. But I know it's still there. Its empty rooms filled with silence and shadows and the echo of footsteps that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when the night is very quiet and very dark, I think I hear the faint sound of metal striking metal, carried on the wind like a distant bell, calling out to anyone who might be listening. I don't listen anymore. Some calls are better left unanswered. I should have left it alone. That's what any rational person would say. But after 23 years working at the Millbrook Public Library, you notice when something's off. And that pale man with his blank book wasn't just off. He was wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I'm writing this down now because I need someone else to know what happened. Maybe then I'll stop seeing those empty pages every time I close my eyes. It started 3 months ago, during one of our quiet Wednesday nights. The library stays open until 9 p.m. on weekdays, though hardly anyone comes in after 7. I was doing my usual evening rounds, reshelving books in the reference section, when I first noticed him. He sat in the far corner of the reading room, hunched over a large book. Nothing unusual about that. We get plenty of regular readers, especially in winter when people want somewhere warm to spend their evenings. But something made me pause between the shelves. Maybe it was how still he sat, or how his pale skin seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. I continued my work, but kept glancing his way. He never moved. Not once. Just sat there, slowly turning pages. The sound carried across the empty room, that soft whisper of paper against paper. The clock hit 8:45 and I started my closing routine. Straightening chairs, checking the bathrooms, making sure no one had fallen asleep in the study carrels. When I reached the reading room, he was gone. No sign anyone had been there at all. I walked over to his table, curious what he'd been reading. Nothing. No book left behind, no chair pulled out. Just the clean, polished surface of the oak table. The next night, same thing. There he was at 7:30, sitting in that same corner chair. This time I paid more attention. He wore a gray suit, clean but outdated, the kind with wide lapels you might see in an old photograph. His skin was so pale it looked almost translucent under the harsh lighting. His fingers moved mechanically as he turned each page. I decided to approach him. It's part of my job, after all, helping patrons find what they need. But as soon as I took a step in his direction, he stood up. The movement was too smooth, too quick. Before I could say anything, he walked between 2 tall shelves and vanished. I ran to follow him. Those shelves led to a dead end, just the wall with our old local history collection. But he was gone. I checked every aisle, every corner. Nothing. That's when I noticed the temperature. The whole section felt ice cold, like opening a freezer door. My breath came out in visible puffs. I hurried back to the front desk, trying to convince myself I was just tired seeing things in the bad lighting. But he came back. Night after night, always at 7:30, always in that corner. Always reading that same book, if you could call it reading. Because on my 4th night of watching him, I finally saw what was on those pages. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Blank white paper, page after page. But he stared at each one like it contained the secrets of the universe, his pale fingers trembling as they turned each sheet. I started documenting everything. The temperature always dropped when he appeared. The lights would flicker just slightly. And the sound, that whisper of turning pages that seemed to echo in my skull even after he vanished. I tried setting up my phone to record him one night. The video showed nothing but an empty chair. The security cameras? Static and interference whenever he appeared. I researched the library's history, looking for any deaths or accidents that might explain whatever this was. The building dated back to 1892, but I found nothing unusual. No tragic stories, no mysterious disappearances, just decades of ordinary small-town life. After 2 weeks of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what he wanted, what he was looking for in those blank pages. So, I made a plan. That Wednesday, I pretended to work in the far stacks, keeping my distance until he settled into his routine. Then I approached from behind, moving as quietly as possible. 3 feet away. 2 feet. Close enough to see the yellowed edges of that mysterious book. "Excuse me, sir? Can I help you find something?" He stopped turning pages. His hands went completely still. The temperature plummeted so fast my teeth started chattering. Slowly, so slowly, he began to turn his head toward me. I saw his profile first. The sharp angle of his jaw, the sunken cheek. His eye, when it came into view, was milky white. No pupil, no iris. Just a pale orb that somehow still managed to focus directly on me. My legs wouldn't move. My voice died in my throat. He stood up. That same unnaturally smooth motion, and the book fell open on the table. The pages were blank, but wrong. The longer I stared, the more they seemed to shift and ripple, like water disturbed by an invisible stone. He took a step toward me. I stumbled backward, knocking into a chair. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, he vanished. Just disappeared between one blink and the next. I ran to the light switch and flooded the whole library with brightness. My hands shook as I searched every aisle, every corner. Nothing. No sign of him or the book. Even the chair he always sat in was perfectly pushed in. I called in sick the next day. Spent the whole time researching ghost stories, local legends, anything that might explain what I'd seen. I found nothing. When I returned to work on Friday, I half expected him to be there, waiting. But the reading room stayed empty all night. A week passed, then 2. No sign of him. I started to relax, to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe stress, maybe too many late nights alone in the building. I almost had myself believing it. Then yesterday I found something in the local history section. A thin folder I'd never seen before, tucked between 2 larger volumes. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed with age. A group of people standing in front of the library, dated 1937. And there he was, standing at the edge of the frame. Same pale skin, same outdated suit, same blank expression. The caption listed everyone in the photo. His name was William Cooper, head librarian from 1935 to 1938. He disappeared one night after closing, leaving nothing behind but an empty desk and a book with no writing inside. I should have left the folder where I found it, should have walked away and never looked back. But I took it home. Needed proof that I wasn't going crazy, that someone else had seen him too. The photo sits on my desk now as I write this. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see his figure shift slightly in the frame. And every night since I brought it home, I've dreamed of blank pages turning endlessly in the dark. I'm going back tonight. The library closed an hour ago, but I still have my keys. I need to return the folder before something happens. I don't know what he's looking for in those empty pages, but I know now he's been searching for almost 90 years. Maybe that's all he is. Just a man who lost something important. Something written in a book that no longer exists. Or maybe there's more to it. Maybe those blank pages aren't really blank at all if you know how to read them. I keep thinking about his eyes. Not just their emptiness, but the desperate way they scanned each page. Like someone searching for a single word in an infinite void of white space. like someone who knows exactly what they're looking for but can never quite find it. The photo seems different now, darker, his figure less distinct. I need to get it back where it belongs before the sun sets, before 7:30 comes around again. But part of me wants to wait, to go back during his regular hours and try one more time to talk to him, to help him find whatever he's looking for in those blank pages. Because that's what librarians do, right? We help people find what they need, even if what they need doesn't technically exist anymore. I know it's stupid, dangerous even, but I can't stop thinking about those empty pages, about how long he's been searching, about what could be so important that it would keep someone looking for almost a century. The sun is setting now. I have a choice to make. Return the photo and walk away, try to forget everything I've seen, or go back tonight, walk into that cold corner of the reading room and finally ask William Cooper what he's been trying to find all these years. I know what I should do, but I also know what I'm going to do. Because some questions once asked don't go away until you find the answer. Even if that answer is written in a book with no words, read by a man with no eyes, in a corner of the library where the lights never seem to reach. I'm going back. If you're reading this and I haven't updated it by tomorrow, well, check the reading room. Corner table around 7:30. Look for a man with pale skin and empty eyes, turning blank pages in an endless search for something that may not exist anymore. Just don't get too close. Don't ask what he's reading. And whatever you do, don't look too long at those empty pages, because sometimes, in the right light, at the right angle, they don't look quite so empty anymore. Sometimes, just for a second, you might catch a glimpse of what he's been searching for all these years. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Trust me on this. Some books are better left unread, some questions are better left unasked, and some corners of the library should stay dark and quiet, disturbed only by the endless whisper of blank pages turning in the night. But I'm still going back. God help me. I have to know. Maybe I'll see you there, in the reading room. Just, if you hear pages turning in the dark, walk the other way. Some stories don't have endings. Some searches never end. And some books are blank for a reason. I'll update this tomorrow, if I can. If not, well, there's always another empty chair at that corner table. Always another set of eyes to search those blank pages. Always another reader looking for words that vanished long ago. The sun just set. It's time. Wish me luck. The smell hit me first. Fresh coffee, rich and strong, wafting through the office at 11:43 p.m. I stopped typing mid-sentence, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. Something wasn't right. I worked on the 14th floor of the Riverside Business Center, and I was the only one here. I'd been the only one here for hours. My desk lamp cast a yellow circle on the scattered papers and empty energy drink cans. Outside my office window, the city lights sparkled against the black sky. The cleaning crew had left around 8 p.m. Security did their rounds at 10. I'd waved to Jerry as he passed by, clipboard in hand. "Burning the midnight oil again, Mark?" he'd asked. I'd nodded, gesturing at the stack of reports I needed to finish before the morning meeting. But now, coffee. Not the stale dregs from the break room pot that had been sitting there since afternoon. This was fresh, the kind of aroma that only comes from coffee just brewed minutes ago. I pushed back from my desk, my chair squeaking in the silence. The sound seemed too loud. My heart thumped harder than it should have. It was probably nothing. Maybe someone from the cleaning crew had come back for something they forgot. Maybe another workaholic from another department had snuck in. But I knew that wasn't true. I had to badge in through security to get to this floor after hours. I would have heard the elevator. The smell was coming from the conference room next door. Light spilled from under the closed door, but I hadn't seen it turn on. I'd been sitting here for hours and that room had been dark. My mouth went dry. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I moved toward the conference room door. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No voices, no movement. Just silence. My hand shook slightly as I reached for the door handle. The metal felt cold against my palm. I twisted it slowly, wincing at the small click it made. Then I pushed the door open, just a crack at first. The conference room lights were on full brightness, harsh fluorescent white that made me squint. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A coffee mug sat in the middle of the long table, steam rising from the dark liquid inside, and one of the black leather chairs was rotating, slowly, deliberately, as if someone had just been sitting in it and had gotten up moments ago. I shoved the door the rest of the way open, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Is someone here?" The chair continued its lazy spin. The coffee mug sat there, innocent and ordinary, one of the generic white ones from the break room with the company logo on the side. Steam curled up from the surface. I stepped into the room. The air felt different, cooler than the rest of the office. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I moved closer to the table, my footsteps echoing in the empty room. The chair gradually slowed its rotation until it stopped facing me. The coffee smelled incredible. Fresh, expensive beans, perfectly brewed. Not the cheap stuff from the break room. I leaned over the mug. The liquid was black as ink, with tiny bubbles around the edges showing how recently it had been poured. "This isn't funny," I said to the empty room. My voice sounded thin and unconvincing. "Whoever's doing this, just come out." Silence answered me. The ventilation system hummed overhead. Outside the windows, a police siren wailed in the distance. I pulled out my phone and called security. It rang 4 times before Jerry picked up. "Front desk, this is Jerry." "Jerry, it's Mark up on 14. Has anyone else badged into this floor in the last few hours?" "Let me check the logs." I heard keyboard clicking. "Nope, just you and the cleaning crew earlier." "Everything okay up there?" My throat tightened. "Someone's been in the conference room. There's fresh coffee and—" "Hold on," Jerry interrupted. "The system's showing some weird readings from up there. Power fluctuations or something. I'm gonna come check it out." "Thanks, I'll—" The call cut off. I pulled the phone away from my ear. No signal. The lights flickered once, twice. The coffee mug rattled against the table. A low vibration hummed through the floor, making the windows buzz in their frames. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could see my breath misting in the air. The chair started spinning again. Faster this time. The ceiling lights strobed, casting weird shadows that seemed to move on their own. My teeth chattered, partly from cold and partly from fear. I backed toward the door. The coffee mug slid across the table's smooth surface, leaving a trail of liquid that steamed in the cold air. It moved like someone was pushing it, but there was no one there. Just empty space and that spinning chair. My back hit the door frame. The lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the city glow from outside. In that dim light, I saw something impossible. The chair stopped spinning, and there was a depression in the leather seat. Like someone was sitting there, someone I couldn't see. I ran. I slammed the conference room door behind me and sprinted to my office. My hands shook so badly I could barely grab my laptop and jacket. I didn't bother shutting down the computer or organizing the papers. I just shoved everything into my bag and ran for the elevator. The button light didn't come on when I pressed it. I jabbed it again and again, panic rising in my chest. Nothing. The elevator wasn't working. I turned to the emergency stairs, pushed through the heavy fire door, and took the steps 2 at a time, my dress shoes slapping against the concrete. 14 floors down. My legs burned. My lungs ached. But I didn't slow down. I hit the lobby at full speed, almost crashing into Jerry as he came out of the security office. "Whoa there!" He caught my arm to steady me. "What's going on?" "The cameras on 14 are all showing static, and the elevators—" "We need to check the security footage," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "From the last hour, the conference room." Jerry nodded, looking concerned. We went into the security office. A small room lined with monitors showing feeds from around the building. He pulled up the footage from the 14th floor conference room. At 11:40 p.m., the room was dark and empty. At 11:41, the lights came on. There was no one visible in the frame. At 11:42, one of the chairs moved on its own, spinning slowly. At 11:43, a coffee mug appeared on the table, steam rising from it. "That's impossible," Jerry muttered, rewinding and playing it again. Must be a glitch in the system. But we both knew it wasn't a glitch. We watched the footage 3 more times. Same thing. Empty room, lights, spinning chair, coffee mug materializing out of nowhere. "I'm calling this in," Jerry said, reaching for his phone. "We need to document this and get it investigated. Corporate's gonna want..." The security office lights flickered. The monitors went dark, then lit up with static. That same low vibration from upstairs thrummed through the floor. And then, impossibly, the smell of fresh coffee filled the small room. Jerry and I looked at each other. Without a word, we both moved toward the door. Behind us, one of the office chairs squeaked as it began to spin. We left the building. I called a taxi and waited with Jerry until his relief showed up for the next shift. Neither of us mentioned what we'd seen. What do you say about something like that? I didn't go back to the office for 3 days. When I finally returned, everything was normal. The conference room was exactly as it always had been. No coffee mug, no spinning chair. The security footage from that night was corrupted, nothing but static. But sometimes working late, I catch a whiff of fresh coffee when I know the break room pod is empty. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see one of the conference room chairs moving slightly, as if someone has just gotten up. I don't work late anymore, and I switched to tea. That was 2 years ago. I still work in the same building, same office. Nothing like that has happened since. But I've noticed things. Small things. The way certain chairs seem to stay slightly warm, even when no one's been sitting in them. The coffee maker in the break room turning on by itself sometimes. Footsteps in empty hallways. The cleaning crew refuses to work on the 14th floor after dark now. 3 different people have quit after experiencing what they called strange things. Security does abbreviated rounds up here, just a quick walkthrough instead of the thorough check they do on other floors. I've done research, lots of it. The building's history is mostly boring, standard corporate stuff. But there are gaps, missing records, unexplained resignations, and stories, whispered by longtime employees, about people working impossible hours, about dedication to the job that went beyond normal human limits. I've started talking to other late workers. People who, like me, sometimes stay well past normal hours. They all have stories, a computer that types by itself, phones that ring with no one on the other end, the elevator stopping on the 14th floor when no one pressed the button. Last week, I finally got access to some old employee records. Buried in a dusty file room in the basement, I found something interesting. 30 years ago, there was an employee named James Carter. He worked in accounting on the 14th floor. According to his file, he routinely worked 8,100-hour weeks. His performance reviews were stellar. His dedication was legendary. Then one day, he just stopped coming in. No resignation letter, no explanation. His desk was found exactly as he'd left it. Computer still on, papers spread out, half-full coffee mug on the desk. The official story was that he'd had some kind of breakdown, burned out from too many hours, too much stress. But his security badge was never turned in. And in the weeks after his disappearance, people reported strange things on the 14th floor. The smell of coffee late at night, chairs that moved on their own, the feeling of being watched. I found his picture in the file. He's sitting at a desk, surrounded by papers and files. There's a coffee mug by his hand, a white one with the company logo. He's smiling at the camera, but his eyes look tired. So tired. Sometimes on quiet evenings when I'm working later than I should, I think I hear typing from the empty cubicles. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of someone in the reflection of my computer screen. Someone sitting at a desk, surrounded by papers, drinking coffee from a white mug with the company logo. I've never seen his face clearly, but I know it's him, James Carter, still working late. still dedicated to the job, still here, 30 years after he disappeared. I'm writing this down because people should know. Not about ghosts or supernatural things. I'm still not sure I believe in those. But about dedication. About what happens when work becomes everything. When you give so much of yourself to a job that maybe, just maybe, part of you never leaves. The coffee maker just turned on in the break room. I can smell it from here. Rich, fresh, perfect. The kind of coffee that only gets made after midnight on the 14th floor. I'm going home now. The work can wait until morning. Some things are more important than deadlines and reports. Some prices are too high to pay. But before I go, I'll pour out a cup of that perfectly brewed coffee and leave it in the conference room. Old habits die hard, they say, even after you do. The first photo showed a gray shape behind my left shoulder. I deleted it, assuming it was just a smudge on my phone's lens. The second photo had the same blur, now closer. By the fifth photo, the shape had defined edges, shoulders, a head, arms hanging at its sides. That's when my hands started shaking so bad I dropped the phone on my kitchen table. Let me back up. This all started 3 days ago, when I decided to visit the Old North Cemetery on the outskirts of Boston. I'm Robert Blackwood, and I've lived in Massachusetts my whole life. But I'd never explored this particular historical graveyard. My interest wasn't purely academic. I'd been researching my family genealogy for months, trying to trace the Blackwood line back before my great-grandfather immigrated here from Scotland. The cemetery dated to the 1700s, perfect timing for finding some answers. The October weather was crisp but sunny when I parked my car outside the wrought iron gates. Dead leaves crunched under my boots as I walked the paths between the weathered headstones. Many were so old the inscriptions had worn away completely. I pulled out my phone to take reference photos of any interesting graves. The light was good, and I wanted clear shots of dates and names. My breath fogged in the cold air as I worked my way through the rows, scanning for familiar names. An hour in, I found the first Blackwood grave. Sarah Blackwood, died 1783. My heart rate picked up. This was exactly what I'd been hoping to find. I crouched down to brush away some dirt and moss from the stone. The surface was rough under my fingertips. I snapped several photos from different angles to capture the faint inscription. That's when the temperature seemed to drop about 10 degrees. The sun was still bright overhead, but goosebumps rose on my arms. I rubbed them, blaming the weather, and moved deeper into the cemetery. The next Blackwood grave appeared just 2 rows over. Thomas Blackwood, 1756-1801. Then another, William Blackwood, died 1792. And another, Mary Blackwood, died 1788. Soon I'd documented 8 different Blackwood graves, all from the same time period. My excitement grew with each discovery. This had to be more than coincidence. The whole time I was photographing the graves, I kept getting hit with random cold spots. The air would suddenly chill around me for a few seconds, then warm up again. The hair on the back of my neck stood up more than once, but I was too focused on my research to pay much attention. I did notice an odd smell that seemed to follow me as I moved between the graves, like damp earth and something metallic. It would come and go, always strongest when I was examining a Blackwood headstone. I figured it was just the autumn decay of leaves and grass. After about 3 hours, my phone battery was getting low and the sun was starting to set. I had dozens of photos to examine later. As I walked back to my car, a strong gust of wind hit me from behind, almost making me stumble. Dry leaves swirled around my feet. The metallic smell was overwhelming for a moment. I drove home feeling satisfied with my discoveries, already planning to dig deeper into these potential ancestors. My apartment was dark when I got back. I flipped on the lights and settled at my kitchen table with my laptop and phone, ready to start analyzing the photos. The first few shots were fine, just clear images of the gravestones I'd found. But then I noticed something odd in the background of one photo. A gray, misty shape hovering just behind where I'd been crouching. I zoomed in, but the shape just got more pixelated. Probably just a lens flare or dirty camera lens. I deleted that photo and moved on. But the shape appeared again in the next image, and the next. Each time it was slightly more distinct, slightly closer to where I was standing in the frame. My hands started trembling as I flipped through photo after photo. The shape developed definition. It looked vaguely human-sized with what appeared to be a head and shoulders. No clear facial features, just darkness where a face should be. But the form was unmistakable. Someone or something had been standing behind me as I photographed those graves. I slammed my laptop shut and paced my apartment, trying to calm my racing heart. My palms were sweating. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone else had been in the cemetery and I just hadn't noticed them. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a problem with my phone's camera. But I knew I'd been alone out there. I would have noticed another person following me around for 3 hours. And the shape wasn't consistent with a living person. It was too blurry, too insubstantial. In some photos, it seemed to be partially transparent. I forced myself to sit back down and look through the rest of the images. The figure appeared in every single photo I'd taken of a Blackwood grave. Always behind me, always slightly closer than in the previous shot. In the final photo I'd taken before leaving, it was standing directly behind my right shoulder, one gray arm slightly raised as if reaching toward me. My phone buzzed suddenly on the table and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Just a text from my sister asking about weekend plans. My hands shook as I typed a reply. I needed to think about this rationally. I opened my laptop again and started researching the names from the gravestones. County records showed that a large group of Blackwoods had indeed lived in the area in the late 1700s. They'd come over from Scotland in 1755, settling in Massachusetts. But the records were spotty. I couldn't find death certificates or clear family connections. The smell of damp earth and metal filled my nostrils suddenly. My apartment was warm, but goosebumps rose on my arms. The lights flickered once, twice. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing. Something moved in my peripheral vision, just a quick shadow passing by the kitchen doorway. I whipped my head around but saw nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the apartment blazing, jumping at every little sound. Sleep was impossible. Around dawn, I finally dozed off on the couch, laptop still open on my chest. I woke to gray morning light and a stiff neck. Nothing seemed out of place in my apartment. I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted to some bad photos. Then I checked my phone. Somehow, new photos had appeared in my camera roll overnight. Photos I definitely hadn't taken. They showed my apartment, my kitchen, my bedroom, my living room. All dark and grainy as if shot in low light. And in every single one, that same gray figure stood in the background watching. I deleted them all with shaking fingers, grabbed my jacket and keys, and practically ran out to my car. I needed coffee and time to think somewhere that wasn't my apartment. The local cafe was crowded with morning commuters. The normalcy helped calm my nerves. I found a corner table and pulled out my phone again, determined to figure out what was happening. The new photos were gone, but the cemetery ones remained. I studied them more carefully now. The figure seemed to be wearing old-fashioned clothes, what looked like a long coat or jacket. Its form was masculine in shape and tall, maybe 6 feet or more. Something about the pose was familiar. I scrolled back through the county records I'd found. There, a faded daguerreotype from 1801. Thomas Blackwood, the same one whose grave I'd photographed, stood stiffly in a long coat, one arm slightly raised. The exact same pose as the figure in my final cemetery photo. My coffee went cold as I dug deeper into the records. The Blackwoods had been a prominent family in the area, but they'd fallen into hard times in the early 1800s. A series of failed businesses, suspicious accidents, unexplained deaths. The family line had dwindled until only a few scattered branches remained. My great-grandfather had been one of those branches. He'd changed the spelling of our name slightly when he immigrated, which is why I hadn't made the connection before. But there was no doubt. I was descended from those original Massachusetts Blackwoods. The cafe had emptied out while I was researching. I looked up to find the barista giving me concerned glances. I'd been sitting there for hours, barely touching my drink. Time to head home and face whatever was waiting for me. My apartment felt different when I walked in, colder, somehow darker, despite the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. That earthy, metallic smell hung in the air. I did a quick walkthrough, checking all the rooms. Everything looked normal. Then I saw my laptop screen. I knew I'd closed it before leaving, but now it was open. A document was pulled up. Parish records from 1801. I definitely hadn't been looking at these earlier. The document detailed Thomas Blackwood's death and burial. He died suddenly at age 45, found in his study one morning. The cause was listed as natural causes, but a note from the examining doctor mentioned unusual circumstances. The body had been cold, as expected, but showed no signs of rigor mortis, and dark soil had been found under his fingernails and embedded in his clothes, though he hadn't been outside in days. I slammed the laptop shut again. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely type as I searched for more information about Thomas Blackwood. News clippings from 1801 painted an interesting picture. He'd been researching his own family history in the weeks before his death, trying to trace the Blackwood line back to Scotland. The same thing I'd been doing. My phone buzzed. Another text from my sister. She was worried because I hadn't answered her earlier message. I tried to type a response, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. The smell of earth and metal was overwhelming now. The temperature in my apartment plunged. My breath fogged in front of my face. Something moved behind me. I could feel it, a presence hovering just over my shoulder. Slowly, forcing myself to stay calm, I opened my phone's camera and switched to selfie mode. The screen showed my face, pale and frightened. And behind me, perfectly clear now, stood Thomas Blackwood. His clothes were dark with grave dirt. His face was gray and sunken, but his eyes were sharp and aware. One hand reached toward my shoulder. I dropped the phone and ran, grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, down the stairs, out to my car. I drove straight to my sister's house in the suburbs, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel the whole way. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside. I told her everything, showed her the photos. She believed me. She's good like that. Said I could stay with her as long as I needed. But I knew it wouldn't help. Thomas Blackwood wasn't tied to my apartment. He was tied to me, to our shared blood. He'd followed me here. I could smell the grave dirt, feel the cold spots moving through my sister's warm house. I'm writing this all down now so there's a record. I don't think Thomas means to harm me. I think he's trying to tell me something about our family, something he discovered in his own research 200 years ago. Something important enough that he's broken through death itself to pass it on. Tonight I'm going back to that cemetery. Back to his grave. He's been trying to lead me there all along, I realize that now. Whatever secrets the Blackwood family holds, whatever Thomas discovered that was worth dying for, the answers are waiting for me there. I just hope I'm ready to learn them. My sister's trying to talk me out of it. Says it's crazy to go back there, especially at night. She's probably right. But the pull is too strong to resist now. Thomas is waiting by the door, patient but insistent. Time to go face my family history, whatever it might be. I'll update this account when I can, if I can. If you're reading this and you've got family research of your own to do, maybe think twice before digging too deep into the past. Some things are buried for a reason. The smell of grave dirt is stronger now. Thomas is getting impatient. Time to go. The first time I heard the footsteps, I blamed it on new apartment jitters. Everyone knows that buildings make weird noises at night. But by the third night, I couldn't ignore them anymore. They were too regular, too deliberate, and always in the exact same spot above my bedroom. I had just moved into Unit 3B of the Oakwood Apartments, a red brick building from the 1960s on the edge of downtown. The rent was surprisingly affordable for the location, and the realtor had emphasized the vintage charm of the worn hardwood floors and dated kitchen cabinets. What sealed the deal was the bedroom, spacious with large windows facing east. perfect for my work-from-home setup. The footsteps always started around 11:30 p.m., not the random creaks of settling wood or the muffled thuds of neighbors going about their business. These were clear, measured steps, back and forth in a precise pattern. 5 steps one way, pause, 5 steps back, over and over. After a week of disturbed sleep, I finally worked up the nerve to ask my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, about the noise. "Oh, honey," she said, adjusting her thick-rimmed glasses. 4B has been empty for months. The owner's been trying to renovate it, but there's some issue with the permits. I frowned. "Empty? Are you sure?" "Positive. I've lived here 15 years. I know everything that happens in this building." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping. "The last tenant moved out suddenly, just packed up and left one day. That night, I lay in bed with my eyes fixed on the ceiling, waiting. At exactly 11:32 p.m. it started. Step, 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 pause. Step, 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 step. The sound was clearer now that I was paying attention. Heavy boots on hardwood floors. I grabbed my phone and recorded the noise. Playing it back, the footsteps were perfectly audible. This wasn't my imagination. The next morning, I cornered the building superintendent, Mike, in the lobby. He was replacing a light bulb, balanced precariously on a stepladder. "Hey, quick question about 4B, I said, trying to sound casual. "Any chance someone's been working up there at night?" Mike shook his head, climbing down. "No way. Haven't touched that unit in weeks. Why?" I played him the recording. His face scrunched up in confusion. "That's weird," he said. "Want me to check it out?" We walked up to the 4th floor together. The hallway was darker than mine, with flickering fluorescent lights that needed replacing. 4B's door had a prominent "No Trespassing" sign and a heavy padlock. Mike unlocked it, and we stepped inside. The apartment was completely gutted. Bare concrete floors, exposed wiring hanging from the ceiling, half-demolished walls. A thick layer of dust covered everything. "See?" Mike said, gesturing around. "Nobody's been in here. Look at the dust, it's undisturbed." He was right. There were no footprints, no signs of recent activity. "Mind if I look around?" Mike shrugged. "Go ahead. Just don't touch any wiring." I walked through the space, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. When I reached the area above my bedroom, I stopped. The floor was solid concrete here, no wood to creak. I jumped up and down a few times. The sound was nothing like what I heard at night. That evening, I installed a security camera in my bedroom, pointing it at the ceiling. I also bought a decibel meter app for my phone. If something was up there, I was going to document it. The footsteps started right on schedule. The decibel meter registered clear spikes with each step. The camera showed nothing unusual, just my white ceiling. I spent hours online researching the building's history. The Oakwood was built in 1964, converted to condos in the 1990s. No deaths reported on the premises, no major crimes. The property records showed a string of short-term owners for 4B over the past 5 years, none staying longer than 8 months. 2 weeks into my investigation, I met Alice from 2B in the laundry room. She was sorting her darks when I mentioned the footsteps. "Oh God," she said, dropping a sock. "You hear them too?" My heart rate jumped. "What do you mean, too?" "The previous tenant in your unit, Jim something. He used to complain about noises from upstairs. Said it was driving him crazy. That's why he broke his lease and moved out." I swallowed hard. "Did he ever figure out what it was?" Alice shook her head. "He tried everything. Called the cops twice, but they never found anything. He even set up cameras and motion detectors. Nothing ever showed up on the recordings." "But I have recordings," I said, pulling out my phone. "Listen." I played the footsteps. Alice's face went pale. "That's exactly what he described," she whispered. I started keeping a detailed log. The footsteps always began between 11:30 and 11:35 p.m. They continued for exactly 47 minutes. The pattern never varied. 5 steps forward, pause for 3 seconds, 5 steps back, pause for 3 seconds, repeat. I mapped out the path of the steps on my ceiling. They formed a perfect line about 8 feet long. When I checked the demolished apartment above, This path crossed directly over a spot where the concrete floor changed color slightly, as if something had once stood there. My sleep suffered. Even with earplugs and a white noise machine, I couldn't ignore the rhythmic thudding overhead. I started sleeping on my couch, but I could still hear them, slightly muffled. One night, after a particularly stressful day at work, I'd had enough. When the footsteps started, I grabbed a broom and banged on the ceiling. "Hey!" I shouted. "Stop it!" The footsteps paused for a full minute, then they resumed, louder than before. I banged again, harder this time. "This isn't funny. I know someone's up there." Another pause. Then the steps continued, unchanged. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and called the police. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. They looked skeptical as I played them my recordings and showed them my logs. "Sir," the older officer said, "we've been to this building before about noise complaints. There's nothing up there." "Then come see for yourself," I insisted. They agreed to check the apartment. Mike arrived with the keys, looking annoyed at being woken up. We all went upstairs together. The apartment was exactly as before. Dusty, empty, undisturbed. The officers swept their flashlights across the bare floors and walls. "No signs of entry," the younger officer reported. "Windows are sealed shut. No footprints in the dust." And yet, as we stood there, I could still hear the footsteps through the floor, clear as day. The officers exchanged glances. One of them wrote down a non-emergency number and suggested I call if the disturbance continued. After they left, I sat in my living room, wide awake, listening to the steady rhythm overhead. I needed answers. The next day, I started interviewing everyone in the building. Most residents brushed me off or said they never noticed anything unusual. But Mr. Chen from 5B mentioned something interesting. Before they gutted 4B, he said, that apartment had a weird layout. There was this long, narrow room right in the middle, like a hallway, but it didn't lead anywhere. Just a windowless space with a door at each end. I dug deeper into the building records at the city archives. The original floor plans showed that 4B had indeed been different from the other units. The strange corridor Mr. Chen mentioned was marked as a storage area on the blueprints. I also found something else. In 1965, just a year after the building opened, there was a police report about a resident of 4B who had reported similar noises. The report was frustratingly vague, mentioning only unexplained disturbances and possible trespassing. Weeks passed. The footsteps continued every night, unchanging. I learned to live with them, sort of. I bought better earplugs, installed soundproofing panels on my ceiling, and started taking sleeping pills. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The precise timing, the exact repetition of the pattern, it felt almost mechanical. Then one day, while helping Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries, she mentioned that her late husband had been the building superintendent in the 1960s. "Oh, that was before all the renovations," she said. "The building was very different then. They had this old pneumatic message system like they used to have in office buildings. Little tubes that would carry messages between floors." "Where were the tubes?" I asked, suddenly alert. "All over, but the main system ran through the center of the building. They sealed it all up when they converted to condos." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the mysterious corridor in 4B right above my bedroom, about the discolored patch on the concrete floor, about the rhythmic, mechanical nature of the footsteps. I contacted a friend who worked in historical building preservation. She explained that pneumatic tube systems often had mechanical pumps that would cycle at regular intervals, creating a distinctive pattern of sounds as the air pressure built and released. The next day, I convinced Mike to let me examine the walls around my bedroom more closely. After an hour of careful inspection, I found it, a small metal panel, painted over so many times it was barely visible. When I pressed my ear against it, I could hear a faint whooshing sound. An old pump sealed behind the walls during renovation, still cycling every night. The sound traveled up through the remnants of the tube system, amplified by the empty space above, creating the illusion of footsteps. I hired an engineer to confirm my theory. He found the ancient pump mechanism, still running on its original timer, moving back and forth on its track every night at 11:30. The building's electrical system had somehow kept it powered all these years. Mike had the pump removed the following week. The footsteps stopped. I still live in 3B. Sometimes at night I catch myself listening for those familiar steps. The silence feels strange now, almost too quiet. But I sleep better, knowing that the mystery above my bedroom wasn't something supernatural or sinister, just a forgotten piece of the building's history, marking time in its own steady rhythm. Mrs. Rodriguez told me recently that other residents over the years had reported similar noises, but no one had ever tracked down the cause. They'd all either learned to live with it or moved out. I kept all my recordings and logs. Sometimes I play them back, just to remind myself that it was real. 5 steps forward, pause, 5 steps back. The ghost in the machine, finally laid to rest. The buzzing wouldn't stop. Not the usual kind from fluorescent tubes, but a deep, persistent hum that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. I noticed it my first day at Hamilton & Associates law firm, standing in my new office on the 3rd floor of the Blackwood building. The source? A plain desk lamp in the corner, its light cutting through the darkness even though I hadn't touched the switch. I'm John Marshall, and after 15 years of grinding away at corporate law firms in Chicago, I'd finally landed a partner position at this smaller firm in Portland, Maine. The salary wasn't as impressive, but neither was the cost of living. Plus, I needed the change. Divorce has a way of making you want to start fresh. The morning started normally enough. Sandra from HR showed me around, handed me the keys, and left me to settle in. The office was bigger than I expected. Corner unit with windows on 2 sides and enough space for a meeting table besides my desk. Previous tenant had good taste in furniture too. Solid oak desk, leather chair, and that lamp. Brass base with a green glass shade. Classic lawyer's office stuff. I tried the lamp switch. Nothing happened. The light stayed on, steady and bright. I checked underneath. No switch there either. Following the cord to the wall, I unplugged it. The light didn't even flicker. Weird, I muttered, plugging it back in. Must be some kind of backup battery system. Made a mental note to ask maintenance about it later. That first day passed in the usual new job chaos, setting up my computer, meeting colleagues, reviewing case files. By the time I looked up, it was past 8, and the office had emptied out. The cleaning crew had already come and gone. Through my window, I could see other buildings going dark as businesses closed for the night. I gathered my things, ready to head home. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft but clear, coming from the corner where the lamp stood. And then the judge said, I froze. The voice was female, elderly maybe, speaking as if in the middle of a conversation. I walked closer to the lamp, and the voice got clearer. Objection sustained, of course. Thompson nearly fell out of his chair. My heart pounded. I'm not usually the jumpy type, but something about this wasn't right. The voice seemed to be coming directly from the lamp itself, or maybe from the wall behind it. I reached for the base, planning to move it away from the wall. The moment my fingers touched the brass, the voice stopped. The metal felt warm, warmer than it should have been from just a light bulb. I quickly pulled my hand back. The next morning, I asked Sandra about the previous tenant. Her usual cheerful expression faltered. Oh, you mean Mrs. Abernathy? Sweet lady, excellent attorney. She was here for almost 30 years before retiring last spring. Did she mention anything unusual about the office? The lamp, maybe? Sandra's smile disappeared completely. I think you should talk to Mr. Hamilton about that. James Hamilton, the founding partner, was an imposing man in his 60s with steel gray hair and perfect posture. When I brought up the lamp, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. Margaret Abernathy was one of the finest attorneys I've ever known, he said finally. Brilliant mind for contract law. She used to work late, always had that lamp on, said it helped her think. Did she ever mention hearing anything strange? Hamilton's expression hardened. John, let me be direct. That office has some quirks. The previous two attorneys we tried to place there after Margaret left requested transfers within a week, claimed they heard voices at night, said the lamp wouldn't turn off. Nonsense, of course. But if you'd prefer a different office... No, I said quickly. Maybe too quickly. No, the office is fine. I was just curious about the lamp's unusual wiring. That night I stayed late again, this time on purpose. The cleaning crew came and went. One by one, the other offices went dark. I sat at my desk, pretending to work while watching the lamp from the corner of my eye. At exactly 9:47 p.m., it started. The witness was clearly lying. Anyone could see that. The same elderly female voice from before, telling what seemed to be a story about an old case. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, and listened. But you see, I had the documentation right there. All those receipts he'd tried to hide. The look on his face when I pulled them out. The voice chuckled, warm and satisfied. It wasn't threatening or ghostly. It sounded exactly like an experienced lawyer sharing war stories with colleagues. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The voice continued for exactly 17 minutes, describing in detail how she'd caught a witness in a lie during a corporate fraud case. When I played back the recording, there was nothing but static. Over the next few weeks, I developed a routine. I'd stay late, wait for the voice to start, and listen to the stories. They were always about cases, some fascinating, some mundane, but all told with the same warm enthusiasm. Sometimes there were other voices too, asking questions or laughing at the punchlines. I never heard them as clearly as the main voice, though. During the day, I did some digging. Margaret Abernathy had indeed been a legend in Portland legal circles. Specialized in contract law, never lost a major case. She'd retired to Florida 6 months ago, but the interesting part was why. Her doctor had diagnosed early-stage dementia. She'd wanted to step down while she could still handle her cases competently. The lamp stories continued every night, always starting at exactly 9:47. Sometimes they'd go on for hours. I started taking notes, writing down names and case details. Most of them checked out in public records. The woman telling these stories definitely knew her stuff. One night, about 2 months in, something changed. I was listening to a particularly interesting story about a contract dispute between fishing companies when suddenly, the voice stopped mid-sentence. The lamp flickered, the first time I'd ever seen it do that. "Hello?" the voice said, different now, confused. "Is someone there?" My throat went dry. Until now, it had been like listening to recordings. This was different. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm here." Silence for a long moment. Then, "You're in my office." "It's my office now, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm John Marshall. I took over your cases." Another long pause. "Oh yes, of course. I retired, didn't I? Sometimes I forget." My hands were trembling. "Your stories. I've been listening to them. They're fascinating. The Harriman fishing case." "Oh," she sounded delighted. "That was a tricky one. Did I tell you about the clause in Section 7 that changed everything?" "Not yet." "Well then, let me start from the beginning." And just like that, we started talking. Really talking, not just me listening to old stories. We discussed cases, legal strategy, judges we both knew. Her mind was sharp as ever when it came to the law, even if she sometimes seemed confused about other things. This went on for months. Every night at 9:47, the lamp would come alive with Mrs. Abernathy's voice, and we'd talk shop. She was an incredible mentor, teaching me tricks about contract law that you'd never learn in law school. My case success rate soared. I never told anyone else about our conversations. How could I? But I did track down her address in Florida and sent her a letter, thanking her for her indirect mentorship and letting her know how her old cases were doing. Her daughter wrote back saying her mother was too ill to respond but had smiled when the letter was read to her. The next night, Mrs. Abernathy's voice was quieter than usual. "I got your letter," she said. "My daughter read it to me. I don't remember our conversations, John." The doctors say I'm losing more memory each day, but I'm glad I could help, even if I don't remember how. You've helped more than you know, I told her. The lamp, she said suddenly. I bought it my first day here 40 years ago. Always helped me think. When I started having trouble remembering things, I'd work late, talking through old cases to keep them fresh in my mind. The lamp was always there, listening. After that night, the voices changed. They became less frequent, more fragmented. Sometimes Mrs. Abernathy would start a story only to trail off, confused. Other voices I'd heard in the background began to fade. 6 months later, I received another letter from her daughter. Mrs. Abernathy had been moved to a specialized care facility. She no longer recognized family members and rarely spoke. That night, I sat in my office, watching the lamp. 9:47 came and went in silence. The lamp stayed on, as always, but there were no more voices, no more stories. It's been 2 years now. The lamp still won't turn off, but it's just a lamp now. Sometimes, when I'm working late, I could swear I hear a faint whisper, like someone trying to remember a story. But maybe that's just my imagination. I won't ever move the lamp. It stands in its corner, shining steadily, a testament to 40 years of legal brilliance. Sometimes new clients ask about it, wondering why I keep such an old lamp that I never turn off. Good light for thinking, I tell them. And it is. That's the thing about law. It's all about preserving things. Contracts, precedents, memories. Sometimes they're preserved in documents, sometimes in court records, and sometimes, just maybe, in the warm glow of an old desk lamp that never stops shining. I still work late most nights. And sometimes when the office is quiet and the lamp's glow fills the corner, I tell my own stories to it, just in case someone, someday, needs to hear them. The first call came at 3:47 a.m. I know because I checked the time on the old Nokia phone my uncle had given me the day before. The screen lit up the darkness of my bedroom with its pale blue glow. Unknown number. I almost declined it, but something made me press the green button. Static crackled in my ear. Then voices muffled and distant like people talking through thick glass. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, straining to hear. The storage unit on Marshall Street. A man's voice broke through the static. Check the back corner. My stomach tightened. I had a storage unit on Marshall Street, Unit 217, where I kept boxes of stuff from my divorce that I couldn't fit in my apartment. I'd never told anyone about it. Hello? I said. Who is this? The line went dead. I sat up in bed, my t-shirt sticking to my back with sweat, despite the cool October air coming through the window. The phone's screen showed the call had lasted 42 seconds. My Uncle Dave had given me the phone yesterday when I visited him at his repair shop. Found this while cleaning out the back room, he'd said. Still works fine. Could be a good backup phone. I'd tossed it in my jacket pocket without much thought. Now I turned it over in my hand, studying the scratched silver case and worn keypad. Sleep was impossible after that. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen counter, watching the sun rise through the window. The phone sat silent on the counter like a dead thing. At 9:15 a.m. it rang again. Same unknown number. Needs to be moved tonight. Different voice this time. A woman. Jack's old place on Cedar Lake Road. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Jack was my best friend in high school. He'd died in a car crash 10 years ago. His parents still lived in the same house on Cedar Lake Road. Who are you? I demanded. How do you know about Jack? More static, then. He'll be there at midnight. Click. My hands shook as I cleaned up the spilled coffee. This had to be some kind of prank. But who would know about both my storage unit and Jack? And why use this old phone to contact me? I drove to my uncle's repair shop, weaving through morning traffic. The closed sign hung in the window. Dave always took Wednesdays off to go fishing. Back in my apartment, I paced. The phone stayed silent all day. I tried calling the unknown number back multiple times, but got only an automated message saying the number wasn't in service. At 6:23 p.m., another call. Combination is 14-27-8. A man's voice through the static. The same numbers as my gym locker. I'd never written them down anywhere. "Listen," I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I don't know who you are or how you know these things about me, but you need to stop this right now." Everything in place. More voices in the background, overlapping. Time running out. The call ended. I threw the phone across the room. It bounced off the wall and landed on the carpet, undamaged. At 11:30 p.m., I got in my car. I told myself I was crazy for doing this, but I had to know. The streets were almost empty as I drove to Marshall Street Storage. The security gate was locked, but I had the code. Yellow lights cast long shadows between the rows of identical metal doors. Unit 217 looked exactly as I'd left it 2 months ago. I unlocked the padlock and rolled up the door. The beam of my flashlight revealed stacked boxes, old furniture, framed photos still wrapped in bubble wrap. In the back corner, partially hidden behind a bookshelf, was a black duffel bag I'd never seen before. My hands trembled as I unzipped it. Inside was nothing but an old rotary phone, its cord coiled like a snake. The Nokia in my pocket rang, making me jump. Unknown number. "Now you understand." The woman's voice was clearer now, almost familiar. "We've been trying to reach you." "Reach me about what?" My voice echoed in the storage unit. "The signals cross sometimes." Static crackled. "Different times, different places. What does that mean? Who are you?" "Careful who you trust." Then the man's voice broke in. "They're watching the phones." The call ended. I stared at the rotary phone in the duffel bag. The metal felt cold under my fingers as I lifted it out. That's when I noticed the manufacturer's label on the bottom. The production date, October 2nd, 2024, tomorrow's date. My Nokia rang again. This time when I answered, there was no static, just a clear voice that sounded exactly like my own. "Don't answer the next call." I drove to Cedar Lake Road with both phones on the passenger seat. The Nokia stayed silent. Jack's old house was dark except for a single window upstairs. As I watched, a shadow moved across the light. The rotary phone in the duffel bag started ringing, an actual physical ring that shouldn't have been possible without it being connected to anything. I let it ring. After 5 rings, it stopped. The light in Jack's house went out. The Nokia lit up with a text message from the unknown number. "Smart choice." I spent the rest of the night driving aimlessly around the city, afraid to go home. The phone stayed quiet. As the sun rose, I pulled into a diner parking lot and tried to make sense of it all. The waitress brought me coffee I didn't remember ordering. "Rough night?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Those old phones," she said, gesturing at the Nokia on the table. "They pick up all sorts of strange signals. My grandmother used to say they could catch calls from different times." I looked up sharply, but she was already walking away. The Nokia's screen lit up with a final message. "Time to let go." I drove to the lake and threw both phones into the deep water. They disappeared without a splash. That was 3 months ago. I've moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear phantom ringing. And when I check my call log, there's always one missed call from an unknown number, lasting exactly 0 seconds. I never answer unknown calls anymore. Some signals are better left uncrossed. Some voices should stay unheard. And sometimes the only way to escape the past or the future is to cut the line completely. But I can't stop wondering about those voices, those fragments of conversations that seemed to know everything about me. Were they warnings, threats, messages from another timeline trying to break through? I keep thinking about what the woman's voice said about signals crossing between different times and places, about the rotary phone with tomorrow's date, about my own voice telling me not to answer. Last week I saw my Uncle Dave at a family dinner. He asked what happened to that old Nokia he gave me. "Lost it," I said. He gave me an odd look. "What Nokia?" "The one you found in your shop, the backup phone you gave me 3 months ago." "Never gave you any phone," he said. Haven't cleaned out the shop in years. I went home and checked my calendar. October 2nd, 2024, the date on the rotary phone, was circled in red ink. I don't remember marking it. The circle is getting bigger every day. Sometimes I wake up at 3:47 a.m., exactly when that first call came. My apartment is silent, but I can feel something listening, waiting. The air hums with unspoken words and crossed signals. I've started writing everything down. Times, dates, names, places. Everything the voices mentioned. There are patterns I can almost see, connections just beyond my grasp. The storage unit, Jack's house, my gym locker combination. How did they know? Yesterday I found an old phone bill from 3 months ago. The unknown number appears in my call log, but when I try to read it, the digits seem to shift and blur. Each time I look, they're different. I bought a new phone last week, latest model, all the security features. But sometimes the screen flickers just for a second and shows that pale blue Nokia interface. When that happens, I can hear static building in the background, like a wave about to break. I've stopped keeping phones in my bedroom. They migrate there anyway, no matter where I leave them. Every morning I find them on my nightstand, arranged in a perfect circle. The waitress from the diner works there every morning except Wednesdays. I've gone back a few times, tried to ask her about what she said regarding her grandmother and phones catching signals from different times, but she always seems to disappear right when I'm about to bring it up. The last time I was there, I saw her talking on a silver Nokia, identical to the one I threw in the lake. I haven't been back to the storage unit, haven't driven down Cedar Lake Road. Some doors are better left closed. Some calls are better left unanswered. But the signals are still crossing. The lines are still open. And somewhere, in some time, a phone is ringing with my number on the screen. I've started carrying a watch instead of checking my phone for the time. It's an old analog model that doesn't need batteries. It runs perfectly, except it always stops for exactly 42 seconds at 3:47 a.m., the duration of that first call. The phone company says my current number has been in service for exactly 3 months, since the day I threw the phones in the lake. But they can't tell me who had it before me. The records show it's never been assigned to anyone else. I dream about rotary dials spinning on their own, about voices crossing through static like ships passing in fog, about phones ringing underwater. Maybe someday I'll answer again. Maybe someday I'll understand what they were trying to tell me, or warn me about. Until then, I keep my phones on silent and my doors locked at night. I avoid antique shops and repair stores. I've learned to live with the phantom ringing, the migrating phones, the circles that keep getting bigger. But sometimes, when I'm alone and the world is quiet, I think about sending a message back through time, about being the voice on the other end of the line, trying to warn myself about something I still don't understand. The signals are still crossing. The lines are still open, and somewhere a phone is ringing.
to the two to the one like this.